Okay, we're going to get started. It's the first time I've ever been able to bang a gavel, so thank you. It was given to me by the House when we, after my first 3 terms here in 2002, hoping I would never come back. Unfortunately, I'm back. I'd like to introduce some of my colleagues who are here. Over there, let's encourage him to join us. Tom Brower. Tom, come on up here and join us. Come on up here, Tom. Come on up here. Tom's a wonderful man. Here we have State Representative Richard Foley from the Windward side, Kuku. Richard, thank you. My name is Bob McDermott. I'm the least handsome on the panel. Here is a state representative who's been a champion for the people of Hawaii for 20 years, Mr. Gene Ward. Gene, thank you. And a friend of mine from the Leeward Coast, and always a delight, and always has the spirit of aloha, Miss Karen Awana. Karen, thank you for joining us. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Ward, and we're going to call up our testifiers who we have in a particular order. Excuse me. In a particular order, and some of them have to catch planes this evening. So we're going to go with them first and keep them in the queue. After that, we have the room till 9 o'clock. We can sure take some other questions and answers, and Gene and I will be here, and hopefully the other colleagues will stay. Gene's going to give you the ground rules, and then we'll call up our first testifier. Okay, Gene?
Thank you, Bob, and thank you all for coming. I know it's a time when you could be spending time other places and doing other things, but you know on the 28th, the governor said we are coming into a special session. There have been no hearings so far, and this is actually not a hearing. This is an informational briefing, which in lieu of a hearing is the equivalent of hearing from the experts and then hearing from the people of Hawaii. So we hope to have an earful, and we hope to ask questions and have a lot of you who, after the experts, will testify. Now, the ground rules are basically the same as in any hearing. It's one person speaking at a time, the panel then asking questions, and so forth, without hopefully cheers or hoots or hollers or things that otherwise are sometimes associated with hearings that are not very civil. This is going to be a very civil hearing, and it's going to be hopefully very productive. There's a lot of information out there that is misinformation. We hope tonight, by bringing in the experts, who many on their own dime have loads of experience to share tonight, and because there are so many, we're going to have to limit them to, unfortunately, a schedule. Particularly those who have to get on an airplane may have the most rushed of all schedule. But what we're going to do is begin by hearing their testimony, asking questions to them. And remember, this is being filmed, so if you miss anything or you didn't hear something, this is going to be on Olelo. And Michelle, where is your little flyer? Everybody can get one of these flyers. This is going to be when it's going to be broadcast. And I see some other things may come later tonight, possibly on the news. So don't feel slighted if you miss something, but we will be here as long as it takes to hear everybody and to have the questions answered. I'm pleased to announce that we have another representative who's just entered the and she's supposed to be sitting up front if she's a representative.
Joe, you're welcome to join us. Come on up.
Joe Jordan from the Windward. Give her a hand. Joe, come on up. Sit by Representative Brower. Representative Brower's seat turns into a pumpkin in 10 minutes.
So if you're going to say something exciting for my sake, please say it really early in the meeting.
Okay. And which is a great segue to our first testifier. Professor Lynn Wardle is going to come up and testify.
Come on up, Lynn.
Lynn, please, front and center. A bit of the background of Professor Wardle. He's a professor at BYU, a graduate of the Duke Law School of North Carolina, and a president of the International Society for Family Law. He's been a visiting professor and made presentations in, it says, over 20 countries. So you're going to do this in English then, right, Lynn? Mm-hmm. And he's published numerous articles and books, too numerous to mention. And one thing that distinguishes him is that he was a law clerk for Judge Sirica Those of you who have a few gray hairs will remember Judge Sirica was in the Nixon White House at the time. He was the judge who, with the Nixon tapes, ordered the tapes, and it was from there that the Nixon White House went down. Did you give him that idea, Lynn, about subpoenaing the tapes? Because that was a
I was
that was
there
a clash.
during the cover-up Watergate trial.
So, Lynn Wardle, and he's got to get on a plane, so please, without any further ado, Professor.
You just share us with us your opening comments. You've obviously read the bill. I'm sure you've looked at the latest iteration, although not as closely as some of us, because you probably didn't get it, but it closely resembles. So why don't you start with your opening statement?
Thank you very much. I'm deeply honored to be here before this distinguished committee
Pull the mic closer.
and hope that I can provide information that's useful, and please feel free to ask questions at any time. My special emphasis in my education and experience is family law and procedural questions, including the jurisdiction for divorce. The provision of the proposed provision raises red flags if it's not facially unconstitutional. It certainly has serious problems, and I'll come to that in a moment. But I commend you for your careful attention to these issues. They're very important, and it's not just academic. What you're dealing with is will have a profound impact through the generations. Today I speak for myself. I'm not representing any of the institutions I'm associated with. More than 3 decades of experience as a family law professor has taught me the importance of tolerance and respect for different family forms, but it has also taught me the importance of preserving the basic and core institutions, and marriage is the most basic and core institution. The bill before the legislature would redefine marriage in a very significant way that I think could be unconstitutional and bad policy in several regards. And I'm going to make 7 points in my presentation, and I'll just summarize them up front because time may not permit me to go in fully, and I'll make my written statement available.
Please.
First, same-sex marriage is contrary to and inconsistent with the law of the meaning of marriage in over 92% of the nations on the face of the earth and over 70% of the states in the United States. Same-sex marriage is legalized, is recognized and allowed in only 7.8% of the nations on the face of the earth. Second, legalizing same-sex marriage could impair recognition of Hawaiian marriages, and not just Hawaiian same-sex marriages, but other marriages from Hawaii may be called into question as a result of policy concerns rising out of the legalizing of same-sex marriage. We've seen that historically, going back to Hyde versus Woodmansee, a British case in the 1860s. Third, the proposed radical extension of divorce jurisdiction, allowing a state, Hawaii, to grant a divorce to people domiciled elsewhere whose only connection with Hawaii is that they came here to get married, flies in the face of existing Supreme Court precedent on what is required for a state court to have jurisdiction to grant a divorce. Fourth, the same-sex marriage bill jeopardizes religious liberty in significant ways, and I talk in my paper about both negative and positive. That is, it's deficient negatively in failing to provide exemption within the context of the bill, and positive deficiency in that it doesn't protect or establish the protected status of the exercise of religion by individuals in this state and by organizations. Fifth, the bill endangers the best interests of children by altering the marital presumption in ways that could create all sorts of controversies, including multiple parentage, not just a mom and a dad, but 3 or 4 parents. All children deserve to have and be raised by, whenever possible, a mother and a father. two mothers and two fathers isn't the same thing. The question comes down to gender. Are gender differences relevant to the purposes of marriage? If not, this bill is uncontroversial. But because men and women are different in ways that relate to the essential purposes of marriage and marital families, those differences need to be recognized. The law simply can't erase them. The bill also is inconsistent with Supreme Court precedents that have long recognized the critical importance of marriage as the foundation of our society. And I believe the bill misrepresents and strains the Supreme Court holding recently in the Windsor versus United States case. The key point that I want to make can be summarized with a story from Abraham Lincoln's life. He was being heckled once, and Lincoln turned to the heckler and said, "How many legs does a calf have if you call a tail a leg?" And the heckler said, 5. And Lincoln said, "No, calling a tail a leg doesn't make it a leg." When there are critical and basic foundational differences, merely changing labels isn't going to give the results that the label is traditionally given when limited to the nature of the institution. Calling same-sex unions marriages will not confer upon those relationships the benefits that come from the gender integration of a man and a woman in the union that we call marriage. I'm going to skip over the most of this so that time would remain for questions to be answered. I'm a law professor, which means that I can speak for 50 minutes without batting an eyelash, and I know that isn't what I'm here to do. I'm not here to lecture, but hopefully to provide information and, if necessary, to answer any questions that might be of help to you. So
Politicians can exceed 50 minutes.
Oh, is that right?
They filibuster.
Okay, well, I will try not to filibuster on this occasion. I just will point out that nearly 40% of the people that live in Hawaii have some Asian background or heritage. None of those nations recognizes same-sex marriage, and another 10% nearly are from Pacific Island backgrounds. None of the Pacific Island nations allow same-sex marriage. I guess New Zealand might be an exception if you now count their recent law. But this is out of step with 178 nations of the earth reject and do not allow same-sex marriage. So this is going to create a possibility for conflict. And I want to talk about, because I'm a family law professor, I'm going to skip religious liberty. There are serious problems, incidents that have arisen in states where same-sex marriage has been legalized, but other panel speakers, I believe, will address that. But my background in family law leads me to have grave concern about the message of the law and the image or the concept of marriage that is conveyed by the law that in some way diminishes and reduces the value and the respect of that institution and of the contribution of men and women to that institution. Recent studies have documented significant advantages to children that are raised by their biological mom and married mom and dad, and the national authority on that is with us today with Professor Regnerus, and I will not talk about that because that would be sort of like someone talking about a heavy rain in the presence of Noah. They understand a little better about flooding. So let me move on to the value of marriage. Marriage isn't a private relationship, but is a public trust. Those who enter into marriages undertake public responsibilities. It is a public institution. The Supreme Court noted that marriage gives character to our whole civil polity. It's the foundation of family and society, without which there would be neither civilization nor progress. It emphasized that marriage involves interests that are of the basic importance to society, according to the court. because it relates to the state's interest in the stability of their social order and the good morals of their citizens and the needs of their children. States have particular interests in the kinds of law that regulate their citizens when they enter into, maintain, and dissolve marriages. Marriage is society's infrastructure. Aristotle famously taught that it was the foundation of the republic, marriage. And both Aristotle and Plato described a set of family laws defining the ideal ages and conditions and qualities and duties of marriage. They said that's the first thing the legislator does, is establish the rules that regulate marriage. So it's the wellspring of social capital in our society, and I think it's incredibly important that while we respect, the question is, can you respect other forms of relationships, polygamous, polyamorous, and same-sex, without calling them marriages? And the answer is yes, of course we can. But do you have to redefine the basic institution of society in order to give respect to other kinds of relationships? No, that's a flawed argument. So I think that I will stop at this point, and the people of Hawaii, I believe, are family-friendly. I think this bill is not family-friendly. I think it has many flaws. The religious exemptions are incredibly narrow and not very generous, inconsistent with the purpose of protecting religion. So I will stop here and ask if there are any questions you might have for me.
Tom, you want to ask some questions? You've got to leave soon?
Oh, no, well, I thought I should keep an eye on Karen, so I was going to say.
Okay.
No, but please, no. Just thank you for your time, and these are, very important pieces of information. One of the reasons I came tonight is because a handful of people have come to my office, and out of respect, I wanted to come and further learn about the issues. But thank you, and I'll let you ask questions.
Richard, do you have any questions?
I have a few.
Pull the
Your
mic.
microphone.
I have a couple questions. Let's start with the first one. In one of the bills, it talks about rights of parents. Okay, and it talks about that in the case of a same-sex marriage, these rights, benefits, protections, and responsibilities shall include paternity, maternity, and parentage presumptions based on marriage. Okay. What are the parentage presumptions based on marriage? What is that referring to? What does that mean?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the presumption that the husband of the woman who bore the child is presumed to be the father. That's the parentage presumption. That obviously is not true if the husband is a woman, if the same-sex partner is, but that's a presumption that goes way back in common law. It's one of the few things they could be, they were willing to presume.
The reason why I asked that question is that here in Hawaii, Native Hawaiian rights is something that's very important here in the state. And in the case of a same-sex couple where, let's say, two females that are married, and one is Native Hawaiian, one is non-Native Hawaiian, and then the non-Native Hawaiian spouse in that relationship becomes pregnant with a non-Native Hawaiian father, or father, I guess we'll just call it father in this case. In that, under the paternity, under the parentage presumption, when that child is born, the spouse is automatically presumed to be the parent of that child, and therefore, on that child's birth certificate, would you automatically write Native Hawaiian in that case? When, in the case of the two mothers, the non-Native Hawaiian becomes pregnant, has a child with a non-Native father, but under the law as it's written right now, the child, even though there isn't any Native Hawaiian blood in that child, it would automatically be written as Native Hawaiian under the current system that we have, and that child would be entitled to all the benefits that are given to Native Hawaiians. Would that be an accurate assessment?
I'm not familiar with that law, but I do have the language of this bill in front of me, and it says parentage rights, benefits, protections, and responsibilities based on marriage shall be the same for all married persons, regardless of the gender of the spouse. The phrase shall be the same implies the hypothetical dilemma that you've raised here. So you don't know how it would be resolved until a court, it was brought before a court. But the language shall be the same certainly seems to be very strong and would raise that implication.
So would this undermine Native Hawaiian, would this undermine a number of the Native Hawaiian foundational rights that we?
It could. I'm not familiar enough with Native Hawaiian special protections, but inasmuch as it uses the term shall be the same, it could have application in that context that certainly would produce unintended and undesirable consequences.
I just want to, while we have him here, Jim, would you just come over to the microphone and amplify that answer as you understand it? What Richard was saying, parent A, parent B, one is Native Hawaiian, one is not. The non-Native Hawaiian gives birth. Will that child be able to qualify for homestead, Kamehameha schools, all these other benefits that are reserved for Native Hawaiians?
Well, see, those are the rights that Representative Foley was talking about. And the language that the professor is drawing our attention to, shall be the same, indicates that those claims can be made by those non-Native Hawaiian children.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. We're going to call you to pinch hit whenever we get in trouble, okay?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
The language of this, though, is focusing on the adult rights, not the child's rights. I'm not sure how it would play out in interpretation, but it's the ambiguity and the breadth of that shall be the same language that is potentially problematic.
Anything else? Karen, do you have some questions?
Thank you. So in the, just as a follow-up to Representative Foley's question, so on a birth certificate in countries where, or states where they accept same-sex marriage, does it read mother-mother or father-mother, or how does it read on the?
I don't know. I've not looked at each of those, but at one point I saw one that said parent A and parent B.
Thank you.
So yeah, again, the implication is that somehow fatherhood and motherhood are old-fashioned and sort of generic androgynous parenthood is all that matters, is troubling, because there's something valuable that is lost when the gendered parenting role is brushed aside and replaced by some neutral concept.
Thank you, Professor, for your words. I have a question more about, I guess, the industry of family law, particularly when it's so new. How do you draw conclusions or precedents without a big basis of empirical data, or at least a case history of 10, 20, 30 years? Where are we in terms of this whole new marriage law?
That's a very good question, and the answer is all you can do is apply the established and tried and true methods of interpretation and analysis to give the best prediction of how the language will play out in particular cases. But we don't know. This is such a new institution. It's newer than our computers, and
But it's always been around. I mean, it's nothing new.
Homosexual relations have.
But never legally ever codified.
Never treated as marriages. Even in cultures in which homosexuality was tolerated, accepted, embraced, sort of part of the accepted social experience, they said this is different. We don't call that marriage because marriage exists for a different purpose, to unite the genders, to integrate the genders, whereas homosexual relations have a different purpose.
So how long would it take, would you estimate, before we know the impacts, the empirical evidence of whether all these variables of family, children, divorce all of the other phenomena?
I think that we already can see some of the impacts resulting from this, even in the short experience that we have had with just 16 or 15 nations and 13 or 14 states, 14 now with New Jersey. Very short-lived, but we can already see some of the impact. One of the critical areas of impact is in legalizing same-sex marriage, frankly, is education. I haven't even touched on that. But what do teachers teach in schools when they talk about marriages? What are the concepts of marriage that are socialized into the minds of those children when we've legalized same-sex marriage? The teachers are agents of the state. They have to embrace and present and convey the state's concept of marriage. That can be very problematic and very troubling and has proven to cause all sorts of problems. Certainly California is a seedbed of those examples of those problematic incidents.
I have a quick question for you, and I know you have to catch a flight. The divorce issue, you mentioned that very problematic in the bill. We might become the divorce clearinghouse for the mainland, because there's no residency requirement here in that, as I understand it.
Well, there are several problems. The one that I was specifically referring to in the bill is that the provision that gives Hawaii courts jurisdiction to grant divorces to couples who are not domiciled in Hawaii. The Supreme Court cases going back for nearly a century, going back 70 or 80 years at least, have said domicile is required, or some domicile-like strong connection, strong, long presence and commitment to the state is required before the state courts have jurisdiction to grant a divorce. This says, no, if you were just here for a weekend marriage and flew back, our courts have jurisdiction to dissolve that marriage. On its face, that appears to fly contrary to all of those established cases that said, we're not going to let states get into tiffs and tussle and wrestling matches over who gets to divorce each other's citizens. You've got to have a strong connection with the state before the state has enough interest to dissolve the marriage. Domicile is the connection, not the mere fact that you went someplace and got married in a weekend. That doesn't, the jurisdiction required to create a marriage is very light, very simple, very low standard. The jurisdiction required to dissolve a marriage is very high, very strict, because the consequences from marriage dissolution are so profound on the society. What society? The society where the family lives, where the couple lives. So the court has said, you've got to have domicile, and this statute says, well, we've got an exception. You don't have to have domicile if they got a same-sex marriage here. I think that's very
And one of the reasons I would assume that there is a domicile requirement is because a divorce proceeding is a substantial cost, correct?
substantial cost to the state and substantial cost in non-financial terms to the state and to the children, to the family. It has long-term costs that are non-economic in terms of social, and it's a profound transformative experience for children. So only the state where those children are domiciled, live with their family, their parents are domiciled, has sufficient interest to dissolve that marriage.
And we have to move along here briefly, but one of the things that we're told is if we pass same-sex marriage, it'll be a boon to tourism. So people will come here and get married and go back to, say, Wisconsin or Pennsylvania, wherever the heck they're from. And then they want to get divorced, they come back here, they don't have a residence here, they clog up our court system, which causes an increase in the tax burden or tax fiscal responsibility for the rest of the citizens who live here, our local people. You see that as a possible scenario?
Well, I see that as an unavoidable scenario. First of all, I think the divorce would lack jurisdiction, and other states would not have to recognize the divorce as a valid divorce. Second, coming here would indeed give costs to the local court system. Somebody's got to pay the judge. Somebody's got to pay the court clerks. Somebody's got to pay for all the filing and the processes. And the court filing fees don't cover that, don't even come close to covering that. So, yeah, it could be costly.
Tom, do you have some questions?
Last question, Tom Brower.
Representative McDermott, let's not bring Pennsylvania into this. It's unfortunate in some ways that the federal government couldn't decide this issue, and we have to do it 50 different ways throughout the states. But do you think it would be better, Professor, to allow the issue of same-sex marriage to be decided by Hawaii's courts or Hawaii's legislature? Couldn't the legislature provide more protections for the religious community?
Oh, absolutely. As between the courts and the legislatures, clearly the legislature is the body that should be making this policy decision, because you are elected by and accountable to the people of Hawaii, and the courts are independent. For a very important reason they're independent, but that independence makes them less qualified, indeed disqualified, to make these kinds of profoundly important policy decisions that affect the whole polis, the whole community. Yeah, the legislature, I commend you for addressing, thinking about the issues. This is the body that should do it. I just don't think this bill is a very good bill.
My good friend and connoisseur here insulted the 51st state, Kentucky, Pennsylvania. But the
I'm ignorant.
well, I've never been called that. But the
You haven't been around here long enough. Stick around.
no, I don't. But the legislature is a great place to decide it. But isn't it even a better place to decide it? Let the people decide.
I concur completely. As a government body, among the government bodies, the legislature is the closest to the people. But 31 states have brought this before the people by constitutional amendments. One of the first was Hawaii, and its resolution was the courts cannot decide it, the legislature should decide. That was correct, as between governmental bodies. But the other 30 states, including California, until it was struck down by Judge Von Walker's strange decision in the Perry case. But the other states have simply addressed the merits of the issue. What is the meaning of marriage? And most of them say marriage is the union of a man and a woman. Some of them go beyond and say marriage is the union of a man and a woman, and we will not allow any other civil or domestic relationship to be treated the same as marriage, whatever label you put on it.
Okay. Seeing no other questions. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you for
Thank
coming
you. It's
out
been
here.
an
We
honor for me
appreciate it.
to
Good trip
speak
back.
here.
Yeah, we appreciate it. What we're going to go, we're going to move from a lawyer to a teacher. And we have from Canada, Mr. Phil Lee. Phil, will you come forward and...
I thought that was Jim Shawn sitting in the audience. Phew!
A former legislator. He is the leader of the Family Coalition Party of Ontario. He's 28 years in the Ontario school system as a teacher, a graduate of the California State Christian University, and served on the faculty of the University of Toronto, and has been making the rounds in the state of Hawaii. Somebody thought that Phil Lee was a rock star or something. Thank you for coming tonight.
It's an honor to be here. It is. Actually, the reason why I was asked was because in Canada in 2005, we approved same-sex marriage. We went through process of change, and at a
Mike, closer. Yeah.
and at a conference that I was at a couple of weeks ago, I shared with some residents here about what happened, and they said, "Man, can you come back?" So I came back, and we're kind of doing the rounds, and we have a PowerPoint presentation that we're sharing with people. But basically what it comes down to is this. Prior to same-sex marriage being approved in Ontario, when it comes to sensitive curriculum for whether it be people of faith or even just people who raise their children from traditional values, in the 1980s, there was very little conflict. The odd novel that came up, but then the school system respected the requests of parents, and an alternative would be given and be granted. In the 1990s, same-sex marriage, before same-sex marriage in the 1990s, comprehensive sex education started to move in. That wasn't a requirement. It wasn't part of the curriculum, but what it was new ideas coming in from the universities that were actually being promoted to the universities and kind of through pressure from outside organizations said teens are going to be sexually active, so if they're going to be sexually active, then we're going to have to teach them how to use contraceptives. We're going to have to introduce them to alternative sexual activities, homosexuality, anal and oral sex, because kids don't get pregnant that way. And that was the justification for it and used in Ontario. And, but it was not curriculum in the sense that it was written up in the government documentation, but what it was supplementary curriculum that teachers could bring into the classroom. And when parents expressed concern about this, the Ministry of Education and the school board said teachers have the authority to bring into the classroom materials that go beyond the minimum expectations of the government curriculum based on their assessment of the needs of the students. So parents, though, at that time said, but this is of concern to us. We'd like to be informed. And as a result, Ontario passed similar policy as Hawaii to inform parents of sensitive curriculum. And so that was great. At that time, the government was responding to the requests of people, and people were informed. In 2005, when we passed same-sex marriage, though, what happened was we put in place Safety in Schools Act. The Safety in Schools Act mandated that the school board build under the guise of anti-discrimination, mandated school boards to build positive relationships with the LGBT community and have them present in the schools. And I'm not 100% opposed to that. You know, I mean, they're people in the community, as long as, you know, activists aren't using that for, you know, to guide and direct. But then principals in this same piece of legislation, principals, when they are dealing with students that have been victimized in school, need to inform parents of the incident that has taken place, unless the student self-identifies as homosexual and the principal is concerned that the parent may not honor the feelings of the student. In that case, the principal is to send the child to counseling from the LGBT organizations to support the child's and honor the child's feelings without informing the parents. And there's no lower age limit placed on this. Okay? Following that, we passed the Equity and Inclusive Education Strategy, and you have to understand the term equity does not mean equality. Equity means that we can put in place policies, procedures, strategies, and curriculum to address the needs of a discriminated group, even if that action discriminates against everyone else in society. And that's Ministry of Education definition. And actually, that definition didn't originate there. It originated with a group called GLSEN, Gay, Lesbian, Straight Educators Network, which created a manual back in the 1990s to advocate for their needs, to address the discrimination, and their focus is to influence schools, influence curriculum, et cetera. I think it's important that you have a look at this and who's influencing our school system once you approve same-sex marriage. The Terms of Reference document, the Equity Inclusive Education Strategy, is a guideline for revising curriculum. We must revise the curriculum to make it LGBT affirming. And as a result, the first curriculum that was revised was the sexual health curriculum. And in grade 1, what was recommended is we're going to introduce the students. Students in grade 1 would have to be able to identify the genitalia of the male and female. And I don't mean just, yeah, that's a male, that's a female. Actually label the parts. Grade 2, we're going to talk about gender fluidity. The fact that being male or female or your gender has little to do with your physical anatomy, but more to do with the clothes you wear, the music you listen to, the activities you participate in, Ministry of Education definition, and that your gender can change. We're talking about teaching this in grade 2 students that are 7 and 8. Then in grade 2, we also have a unit called Both And, which is a cross-dressing unit where we read about a person who is a gender-neutral person. They can experiment with living as a girl, as a boy. Then we have a cross-dressing center in the class, and they can experiment with being a girl, being a boy. The idea is that your gender is fluid and that you can change at any time. Along with that, our school boards have changed the policies on washroom, change room, and shower facilities, that they can be used by any person that relates to that particular gender. It's not identified to their physical anatomy. In grade, so that's grade 2. Grade 3, another example. So is I get a phone call from a grandparent who says, my grandson just married his best friend Jimmy. This is grade 3. So what happened? Grade 3 class, this teacher reads the book, Daddy's Wedding. There's about 2 men who get married. A person dressed in as a cleric comes in, says, in Canada, isn't it fantastic? We live in a country where, and it goes beyond knowledge, live in a country where people of the same gender can get married. I'm here to tell you about that. And who's your best friend? Who would you like to marry? We have a mass same-sex wedding ceremony and celebrate with cake and ice cream. So those are examples of lessons. Once we passed the equity strategy, then the government of Ontario passed legislation, because all of this is policy. It's strategy. It's not legislation. But in 2012, as a result of pressure from the LGBT community, we passed our Accepting Schools Act, Bill 13. Bill 13 put all of these changes into legislation, mandating them into legislation. As a matter of fact, the Minister of Education, when introducing the policy, said the intent of the policy is to change the traditional norms and values of society and change them for good. And what I'm sharing with you is what's happened in Ontario, but other countries, I have colleagues in Britain, Tasmania, Australia, in Connecticut, et cetera, say we're following a similar track, Phil. So, so this legislation, if you're going to change the traditional norms and values of society, you're going to have to have some significant strategies. Strategies in the legislation are, 1, mandating GSA clubs, Gay Straight Alliance clubs, in the schools, and number 2, integrating into the curriculum positive, affirmative LGBT messaging, every subject, every grade level, and actually the term that's often referred to is every subject, every grade, every day. I'm not saying it happens every day, but so now what happens is instead of the curriculum being sensitive curriculum coming in at some times, where parents can say, I'd like to know about maybe some novels, or I know sex ed could be sensitive, could you inform me about that? Now it's very difficult for parents to identify when this might come in. And our question is, we've taken the sensitive curriculum, which used to take place in health class, which might be a few classes a year, and now we're integrating it throughout the year, and parents are asking, can I be informed? And the Challenging Homophobia and Heterosexism document, which has 12 lessons at every grade level on how to integrate this into the classroom, page 10, frequently asked questions, says teachers are not allowed to inform parents about sensitive curriculum because you're creating an inclusive education classroom, and to inform affirms the discrimination of that faith group. So, and now when it comes to having faith clubs in our schools, principals, when students come in and ask, principals are saying, no, we can't have faith clubs because your faith is not consistent with the values of the GSA club. So
We'd like to, I know you could go on.
Absolutely.
But we'd like to get some questions. We'll
Sure.
start down at Richard. Would you like to have some questions? You don't want to ask again? Okay, thank you.
Shoot, where do you start here?
You want to formulate and we'll go down?
Yeah. Go.
Karen, would you like to ask some questions?
I'll pass right now.
Okay.
Well,
You
let
have
me.
a question? No, you just got it back.
Okay, let me ask this. When it comes to the gender differences, okay, and you can wake up and we've kind of passed similar legislation here in the state of Hawaii where you can wake up and say I feel like a woman today, and then right, and then tomorrow you wake up, I say I feel like a man today, and then you be a man. If you do genetic testing you essentially can identify whether the person you're testing their DNA is whether they're male or female.
Correct.
Now, if it comes to, and I'll take this back to the Native Hawaiian issue as well, is if your identity is related more to the kind of music you listen to, or things like that, how much more difficult is it to make the leap where your lineage or your heritage is no longer what's important? It's what you feel like you are. So will the courts be able to no longer say that, okay, we have Native Hawaiian rights and we have to do away with those because your identity is dependent on, the kind of music you listen to, what you do?
I'm not an expert on legal issues. I'm just sharing what's happened in Ontario to our education system. I do see, however, it often leads to confusion in our kids. And I'm not saying we can't respect people who, are different. Absolutely. No, we do respect that. But, for example, my son has a lot of interests that are consistent with the description that I have. He loves fashion. He's a designer. He's et cetera. But he says, Dad, I'm still a guy. I don't want people, and he says, I go to school and they're telling me I'm queer. They're telling me I'm not a guy. So I don't like that. Because their definition doesn't fit me. That's just a personal example,
Phil, I want to go back to the empirical basis of information.
Sure.
Some of these things you said sound almost like exaggerations.
Yep.
Are these real things where 2 or 3 years old who are actually asked to
Grade
get
2 and
married?
3. Grade 2 and 3.
Is
Yes.
that
So 7, 8 years old.
Is that
I've had the
optional
phone calls. Yeah. This is not, again, this is not required curriculum. Okay. Because what happens is when the government changes the curriculum, they did this with the health. They put it on the website, and in the legislature, Toronto Centre, MPP, and others said, and the right-wing rural homophobes screw it up for us. And that's exactly what was said in the legislature. Because those who are more traditionally minded complain about the curriculum. So instead of changing the curriculum the ministry way, they create a teacher resource document on how to integrate this, 12 subjects. So they're kind of subversive with this. And since it's a teacher resource document, it's not on the school board's websites. But when we have inclusive education instruction, this is the document that is referenced. And this is the document the teachers are using in the province. So this is what's coming.
The second question is, why not an opt-out provision, which you turned kind of on its head and said that if you let parents opt out their kids, that would be considered a discrimination?
What I've been told, 2 things. One, teachers have been told, once you come to this system, parents have been told, you put on the you take off the faith cloak, and it's been said in meetings, I've been in there. You take off the faith cloak, you put on the cloak of the Ontario Human Rights Commission Provincial Code of Conduct. And you operate with that code of conduct until you leave. And that also means that churches no longer are supposed to be renting space in school facilities because they can't operate under that code of conduct.
I have a question, Mom.
One more.
Sure. Did your private school enrollment spike in Ontario or in Canada?
Our private school enrollment is gradually increasing. Our homeschooling numbers are gradually increasing, absolutely, in part because of this. Yes.
So
But can I just share something? When they passed the Accepting Schools Act, the Ontario Human Rights Commission, similar to your civil rights, said, and once we fix, and that was the term she used, the secular and Catholic schools, because this applies to Catholic schools also, then private schools will be next, because in Ontario, certification is dependent upon private schools teaching 75% of the curriculum. And so their goal will be to change the curriculum to the point where the private schools would not be able to be consistent. But anyway, she said, once we fix the secular public and the Catholic schools, private schools are next. And Alberta Alberta had legislation that was going to be passed first and second reading, that homeschooling families would not be allowed to integrate any faith into the subject area between 9 and 3, or when their instruction was. But the only reason why the legislation didn't pass was because it died because an election was called. So that this is the direction, and it's all and we have a case where a family has been refused to be accommodated, and it's in the courts right now.
So if you're a poor family
Yeah.
that has values, traditional values, and you don't want to send them to a public institution,
That's right.
which is teaching them these things, you're SOL.
You're absolutely right. We have the organization that I also represent, called Peace, advocates for families of faith, and we are often there in the school boards advocating for them and to be accommodated.
Phil, we got 5. You're going to stick around, or you have to go to another presentation?
I have to be a presentation. Actually, I probably don't have to start till about 7:30.
Okay, well, we'll do you 5 more minutes. Representative Ward, go ahead.
Okay.
And I've got 2 questions.
When you mentioned civil rights, I wanted to mention just for the record that Bill Hoshijo was invited for this evening, but he had a former engagement and couldn't make it because the Civil Rights of Hawaii is a very active and very prominent organization. So thank you for citing that.
I've got 2 questions for you. First of all, I agree with you. We've got to love our homosexual brothers and sisters.
Absolutely.
And treat them with respect and dignity.
Absolutely.
I have lived that in my life. I was, as a father of 8, though, and 4 children still in public school, the concerns I had was about the education system. And I wrote the superintendent a letter about Dick and Jane books. Now, you and I are both old enough to remember Dick and Jane books.
I do.
And some of the folks in here, those of us who are long in the tooth, they don't have them anymore. It's called something else. But the point is, in a Dick and Jane book, if it shows a mom and dad, all of a sudden now we pass this law, right? We will immediately have a lawsuit that, if not a lawsuit, they'll do it on their own, some of the progressive folks, and will say, you know, you have to show all aspects of it. And you'll have Dick has 2 daddies or Jane has 2 mommies without the parents being told, correct? Because it will then be the law. Is that a fair assumption?
Actually, I think in Massachusetts, there was the federal courts ruled that parents did not need to be informed about sensitive curriculum because of the passing of same-sex marriage. Yes.
And we have and part of the answer I got was a non-answer. I asked 6 pertinent, precise questions as best I can as a non-lawyer, and some of the answers were, well, this is covered by our controversial policy. But once same-sex marriage becomes a law of the land,
Yes.
it's the law of the land, correct?
That's right.
And it's no longer controversial.
Well, it's still controversial, but it's the law of the
Technically.
land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So parents don't have a say. I did ask one question, and not to be inflammatory, but this is serious business, like you said.
Absolutely.
And we see what's going on in California with the transgender situation. And I said, I asked them, will a transgender student and or teacher be allowed to use the same shower, locker room facilities as people of the opposite sex?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer I got from the Board of Education, and I quote, we put the needs of the students first,
That's
unquote.
Right. That's right.
Which students?
You're right.
They didn't answer me. Which
You're right.
students?
Absolutely.
And they ignored the teacher component of it. So you're saying that even though Canada is not part of the United States, this is what we can expect.
In Ontario, different school boards have passed the same policy, that students may use whichever washrooms, change rooms, shower facilities that is consistent with their gender identity.
Okay.
And that can fluctuate from day to day.
It can, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and you're going to get those students who want to have a hoot and say, no, I feel like a girl this day,
You
or
mean
whatever.
teenagers do that sort of stuff?
So can I just share one other thing with you?
Yes.
Okay. With the passage of same-sex, prior to same-sex marriage, the community had input in the sexual health curriculum. Okay. When we had some things that we felt were a conflict, they respected our input, and the curriculum in my own city, Hamilton, became more abstinence-based as a result, and public health responded to the research, and as a result, teen pregnancies, we had the highest pregnancy rate in the province of Ontario, but it dropped 20%. But since same-sex marriage now, we have organizations, other organizations that are involved. They're not accepting the input of faith community. And I'd like to just share with you some documentation that's now available in our high schools, okay? This one is called My Sex Life, Info for Young POS People, which are people who are positive, HIV positive. And it talks in here about my right to have fantastic sex, okay? And it does talk about your responsibilities, but I mean, anyway, you can have a look at it, or I can get you a copy.
Yeah.
Okay,
You-
I can get you a copy.
Okay.
This other one, and that's produced with federal dollars from our AIDS Committee of Toronto. This is a deck of sex cards. Okay, and it lists various sexual acts on here and I've been advocating for the faith community on the sex issues for 17 years. And this just came out this year, and this stuff I'd never seen before.
Mhm.
And you know, I don't want to offend anybody by reading them, but
Right.
if you would like, I can get you a copy of those. Okay.
Thank you.
And again, it has to do with who's in control. And now, when the faith community or traditional families ask to be informed, they're told no, they don't have the right. The same thing is happening in Britain. The Bottom Line. It's a pamphlet on male-to-male sexual activities, including inserting a fist in the lower orifice to massage the prostate, but they avoid the pornography by using male dolls. Okay,
Thank you.
and so
So you're saying this is real?
absolutely, and it's not just Ontario; it's happening globally, and there's a pattern that's followed, and it is being directed to a great degree by an organization founded in the United States called Gelson, and it was headed up, it was founded by Kevin Jennings, President Obama's education, I guess, head of it was the NEA.
Right.
And so,
Bill, thank you so very much. I don't mean to cut you short.
Thank you.
We have some fantastic guys who got to catch a plane tonight.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I have Mr. Who's next? Got to get your next plane. Come on. And you're O'Reilly's Bed and Breakfast, or no, Duncan?
My name is Byron Babon. I'm
Okay.
an attorney with the Alliance Defending Freedom. I represented the O'Reillys in their case and have represented many people or religious business owners that have fallen under the hard fist of the sexual orientation laws and how
Speak close to the microphone.
and how same-sex marriage affects that. Like I said, I'm an attorney with Alliance Defending Freedom. We're the largest legal alliance. We fight for religious liberties, our first freedoms. We're involved in the courts through training and education. I'm one of the attorneys for the Hawaii Family Forum in the Jackson versus Abercrombie case, which is at the Ninth Circuit, in which Hawaii's marriage law hangs in the balance. There, of course, the governor and the plaintiffs are asking the court to strike down Hawaii's marriage laws, and they will have to overcome the federal district court's decision, which eloquently defended marriage and why the state has the strongest interest in protecting marriage between a man and a woman. And as I've said before, we are involved in these cases, and I just want to talk a little bit about how same-sex marriage works in conjunction with sexual orientation discrimination laws, and how that comes down and has a burden on people of faith that run businesses and organizations and bring their faith to it. With the arrival of same-sex marriage, Americans have been told that religious freedoms must give way. This movement for fundamental change in marriage is not just about granting same-sex marriage and then we'll all be peace and that will be the end of it. It is naive, of course, to think that, aside from redefining marriage, nothing else changes. No serious person accepts that. What it will mean is the ascendancy in public policy and culture of the view that there has never been anything special about marriage between a man and a woman, that children don't need a mom and a dad, they just need an adult or some combination of adults. It is also about delegitimizing the idea that child rearing is done best in most cases when it is done by the mother and father that together brought the children into the world. For the first time in the history of civilization, public policy is now permitting and condoning the idea that it is just as well to deprive children of either their mother or their father. That's what same-sex marriage does, doesn't it? It deliberately deprives a child of either his father or mother. And if you're not willing to lend your time, talent, your business to that idea, then you're going to be labeled a bigot, deserving of punishment under the processes of the state. And it's this point that I would like to illustrate. I'm going to talk about Jim and Mary O'Reilly, who own the Wildflower Inn. In the bucolic Vermont countryside, Jim and Mary O'Reilly operate Wildflower Inn, a family-owned bed and breakfast. For many years, operating in a state that legally recognizes same-sex unions, the O'Reillys, a committed Catholic family, had an established business practice when approached by anyone asking the inn to host an event celebrating a civil union. At that time, civil unions were legal in Vermont. And that approach was to be very upfront and to say, listen, we believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. We're very committed Catholics. We want you to know that. We think it's important that you know that before you have your civil union ceremony here or celebrate it here. We want to be upfront with that, and it's important for us to tell you that. We are not going to prevent you from having your ceremony, but we want you to know that. The Human Rights Division of Vermont said, you know, that's okay, because you're not really discriminating. You're just saying what your position is on it. And that was in 2005. But 2 years after same-sex marriage passed in the state in 2011, the ACLU teamed up with the Human Rights Commission, the same entity that had told the O'Reillys years before that it's okay if you tell people where you're coming from. And they teamed up with them, and they brought a lawsuit against the Wildflower Inn for this very same policy of telling people that, hey, we're a committed Catholic family. We put our time, our energy into promoting marriage between a man and a woman. It's a sacrament in our faith. We want you to know that. But they were sued for telling that to people, not for denying them access to the inn, but just for telling them that. And they were dragged under and into the administrative world of human rights commissions. And after a long bout of litigation, they got to the point where their business had been beaten down. They had been run down in the press constantly. There was a huge campaign run against them, and they were barely hanging on to their business. And so they settled with the other side. They ended up paying thousands of dollars, $30,000, because what was their crime? They had told these people that they were committed Catholics that believed that marriage was between a man and a woman. And so the expression of their religious beliefs came at a great cost after Vermont passed same-sex marriage in that state and put the state's anti-discrimination laws on steroids. This case was not about access to service. I highlight that it was about them speaking and communicating their position about marriage. But that didn't stop the machinery of the state. And this is not the only story like this. The O'Reillys didn't discriminate based on sexual orientation. They had clients and customers that engaged in homosexual practice, identified as homosexuals. But once same-sex marriage passed, it was no longer permissible to say, listen, I'm not against people that practice homosexuals. I'm not a bigot against them. I'll serve them. But what I can't do as a Catholic is I can't participate in a ceremony that mimics marriage but is fundamentally different and violates my religious faith. You might think that this is isolated, but we deal with inquiries like this all the time. People are calling us all the time. They're threatened. Photographers and people that are in the service industries, that part of their business is to provide a communicative service. And they're threatened with lawsuits if they say, look, on the basis of my faith, I can't print that T-shirt that promotes a gay pride or promotes homosexual behavior. We have a case like that in Kentucky, where there's a T-shirt company that would not print a T-shirt that said Lexington Pride, which was the gay pride festival there. And they politely told them, they said, listen, we're Christians, we'll print you all kinds of T-shirts, we'll do all kinds of services, but we can't promote that because that really runs counter to our religious faith. And the owner, Blaine Adamson, said, listen, I'll hook you up with another printing company at the same cost. He called up a friend. They said, sure, we'll do that. And that's all that happened there. Well, that wasn't enough, because after he did that, he was sued, and he's been now in litigation for a year simply because he exercised his right to say, listen, I cannot participate or perform a service in which I am communicating and I am promoting something that runs counter to my religious faith. There is, in New Mexico, John and Elaine Huguenin. They own a photography company. They are the nicest, most well-mannered people you would meet. Elaine is the principal photographer of the company, and her main or specific thing that she does is wedding photography, and she's one of the best in the state. And she was asked several years ago now, well, many years ago now, because it's still in litigation, 5 or 6 years ago, she was asked to photograph a same-sex commitment ceremony. And she politely told them, she said, listen, I'm a Christian, and I can't use photography, which is an artistic expression of me, to communicate a particular event that runs counter to my deepest held religious beliefs about marriage. And she was sued, and she was ordered by the administrative tribunal in New Mexico to pay the plaintiff's attorneys $7,000 attorney's fees. And then she's gone through the long litigation of going through the New Mexico court system, in which she has lost all the way, in which the courts are rejecting the claim that, hey, I have a First Amendment right to not communicate a message. Just as you have a First Amendment right to communicate any message, you also have First Amendment rights not to communicate a message. And this is clear as day. But this all changes with civil unions and same-sex marriage and the anti-discrimination laws. And we are told, in fact, the former commissioner of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Kai Feldblum, that President Obama appointed, and her term just ran up in the summer. But when she was asked about this, hey, what's going to happen when religious faith comes into conflict with same-sex marriage? And her answer was, you know, that's a tough question, but religious faith is going to have to give way. So what we have here is our first liberties, you know, the liberty that this country was founded on, and that the whole idea of the Bill of Rights started with, our right to the free exercise of religion, our right to speak what we want to, our right to be free from compelled speech, must now give way to this new movement to create a right of same-sex marriage and a right to basically not be offended with respect to your sexual orientation. So John, the Huguenins, Elaine Photography is the name of the company. Their case, they lost at the New Mexico Supreme Court, and they're now appealing to the United States Supreme Court. And I could go on and on with stories, and I have them here, and I know that my time is limited. But one of the things that I really want to point out here is that it's not just, okay, there's same-sex marriage. Now there is a premium on making sure that same-sex marriage filters in and through the policies of the state and the culture. Of course that happens. But what also is happening is if you oppose that in some way, not only are you a bigot, but you're somebody that needs to be punished. So if you refuse something that I want you to affirm or confirm with respect to my sexual orientation, that's going to be discrimination, and that's going to be violating the state's anti-discrimination law, and you're to be punished for it. And that is exactly what is happening. But it's not just the fact that you have a dispute and you can say, well, we got to let the courts sort it out. Surely the courts are going to recognize the religious freedoms of people and their rights, the right to free speech. But even if that happens in the long run, when you get through these cases, and by the way, very few of them end that way. Most of them end with the business being run down and they throw in the towel because they're trying to hang on not only to their business, but they're trying to hang on to their personal lives in some of these cases. But it's that journey of going through litigation to try to defend your right to be who you are, to say what you want to say. And it is a long, hard journey. When you get sued, it is a difficult process and it takes a long time. And whenever it involves same-sex marriage pitted against somebody's free exercise of religion, you take a beating in the media of it, and the other side they're organized such so that they really make it difficult on you, and that process is just a long, brutal process. So I say all this to say that you have to be extremely, well, let me put it this way. You need to be forewarned that when a state passes same-sex marriage, you're not just changing the redefinition of marriage, you're changing the way things are going to operate and the way things are going to work. And the downside of that is that the burden always falls on people of faith. And people of faith are being sued, and they're being dragged into administrative courts, and they're basically being punished if they don't participate or facilitate in same-sex marriages or in the legitimization of those relationships. I can tell some more stories, but I don't want to overextend my time.
There's a wonderful testimony. Richard, do you have any questions?
I just have a quick question. This is an observation that I've made with countries that have passed same-sex marriage. They attach when they're dealing with poor developing nations who believe in traditional marriage, they attach their concepts of marriage to a lot of the foreign aid that they give to these smaller, poorer countries. For example, New Zealand has cut all foreign aid to the Kingdom of Tonga, right? And what that has done internationally is because they have these traditional values, it pushes these nations closer and closer to China and other countries that are not necessarily friendly towards the United States. And that seems to be the trend even nationally with the United States, is that just like how we have this issue, they're now going internationally and waving their finger at these other nations who don't believe, who have traditional values, and are starting to isolate and persecute these countries based on their belief in certain traditional values. Does that just run similar with?
Yes, it's entirely consistent with what I'm saying. Look, the United States is unique, or it has always been unique. It was founded on the idea that Almighty God created the mind free. In other words, you had the right to conscience. You could disagree with the king. You could oppose the king to his face. We were a country of disagreeers. We can argue. We can disagree. We don't have to support each other. We can support each other. That was the great genius of the United States, and that is what allowed people to live together. The irony of that, by allowing a lot of conflict and not punishing people for it, is people end up getting along better that way. But that idea is lost, and what we have now is coercion, the government forcing people to submit and to believe a certain way about human sexuality. And there's a lot of political money in that. And now you see this internationally. So it's a form of coercion that comes through state non-discrimination laws, the enactment of same-sex marriage, attaching strings to foreign aid, or conditions to foreign aid, a form of what we used to call political extortion.
Right.
Absolutely, those things are similar, and that's what we have here. And the end game is this: the end game is you can keep those beliefs, but you can keep them in the closet. And if you bring them out here, we're going to punish you for it. Now, when I look at Hawaii's same-sex marriage bill, I'm just going to be very frank as a lawyer that actually deals with real people who end up getting persecuted when same-sex marriage is passed in states, and as I said before, puts anti-discrimination laws on steroids. I mean, the law is appalling. I mean, the religious exemptions are embarrassing. They're so ridiculously narrow, they hardly protect anything. They protect a pastor. A pastor doesn't have to participate in a wedding ceremony. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for almost nothing. We know that. What else does it do? Well, a church doesn't necessarily have to solemnize a marriage on its property, so long as the public doesn't come on the property, or so long as you don't get any money, you don't get the envelope from the bridegroom. I mean, what is that? I mean, what about people of faith that own businesses? I'm telling you, you don't go to work and have to leave your faith at the door. You can operate your business, it's your business, and you should be able to operate it according to your faith. And they're saying, no, you can't. They're saying, we'll destroy that business, and we'll punish you with fines until you get with the program. And I'm not exaggerating here. I'm a real lawyer that deals with real people that cry and have their relationships strained and have their businesses beat down. This happens in real life. And like I said, I can keep going because I got pages of it. And last week, I just talked to 3 other people calling up. And of course, I can't reveal their names, but one is a book illustrator. I've been illustrating books, great artist. Been doing this for years. Now they want me to do a book that promotes homosexuality. I can't do that. They're threatening to sue me. What should I do? What happened to America? Go get another illustrator. Let me be free to pursue what I want to pursue, and you be free to pursue what you want to pursue. That's not what the new regime is about, and that's not what same-sex marriage is about.
Karen?
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Do you know of any cases where these businesses who would like to exercise their religious rights had overcome those adversities? Any cases?
Not many. I'm going to tell you about one, and it was still, even though their rights were vindicated, they suffered a brutal beatdown getting there. I'm going to tell you about Julia Ward, who was a student at Eastern Michigan University. And Julia is, one of the finest people you could ever meet. Very gracious, very eloquent, and very elegant. And she was in the counseling program there at the school. And as part of earning your counseling degree, you had to participate in a practicum. And so what that basically means is you're practicing counseling. And so people would come in for counseling, and you would give that to them. And this was in preparation of you earning your degree and going out in the world and counseling people. She had a lesbian was sent to her and wanted to be counseled basically about how to improve her relationship with her partner. And without, even bringing it up, Julia went to basically her teacher, who had supervisory authority, and said, listen, I can't do this because in my religious faith, I can't facilitate that type of religion. That would be wrong. Can I get another counselor to help her out? And that's what they did. And of course, that was part of the policy, right? Because if you're a counselor, there's all kinds of reasons, all kinds of ethical reasons why you shouldn't counsel a particular person or a particular group of people. This is part of that system. And Julia was saying, not only can I not do this as a matter of my faith, it would be unethical because at the end of the day, my heart's not going to be in this one, okay? Well, she thought that was that, but it wasn't. The school came back against her and told her that she was going to have to drop her religious faith with respect to that problem, and she was going to have to counsel people that were in same-sex relationships and help them in those relationships, even though that ran counter to the faith. And this got nasty. I mean, this got to where she was being pulled in front of members of the faculty, and they were getting her involved in a theological bout and questioning her theology, and asking her if she thought her particular brand of Christianity was better than other brands. It was ridiculous. And they put her through this, and she was not allowed to continue the program. And I mean, she was 13 credit hours away and had stellar grades. Now, she brought suit, and she had to fight that way through the federal court, and fortunately, but the lower court didn't agree with her, but she had to go to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals was a panel, and I just want to tell you, I'm not saying that this is typical, but they were a panel that was really taken aback by this, and they said, this is wrong. You can't do this. The school can't coerce people into giving up their religious beliefs just because they want to be a counselor. So it took a long time. Julia went through a lot. It was very stressful. It was very difficult. She had to change schools. She ended up becoming a counselor. But as you can see, nobody should have to run that gauntlet of persecution merely because you disagree about a point of human sexuality. So that's the only case I can think of at the moment.
Yes, I have two questions. The Vermont case, the bed and breakfast, is not that strange in that in my district, in Hawaii Kai, a similar suit was filed. And it would be nice to get an update if anybody in the room knows anything about it. Do you?
Yeah, I can, and so can Jim. That's one of the
stories. Is there anything
stories.
that's allowable to be said? Because I guess it's still.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, well, Phyllis Young owns. Jim, do you want to jump up here and talk about it too? Jim is litigating that case as well. Well, Phyllis Young, basically, she owns a home here in Hawaii. It's her personal home that she lives in with her husband. And to pay the mortgage, they rent sometimes up to 3 of the rooms, one to up to 3 of the rooms. And this is their personal home, okay? This isn't an inn. This isn't a hotel. And she was basically asked by a lesbian that, hey, my partner and I want to come and stay in your home. And she politely said, listen, we're people of faith. This is our personal home. We do lend out some of the rooms, but we can't do that. And she was sued as well, and that litigation is ongoing. You want to add anything to that, Joe?
Well, yeah, what's amazing is when you go through the administrative process at the Civil Rights Commission, they have a conciliation process where they try to get the parties to settle, okay? And these were the terms that the Youngs were offered. Pay $20,000 and put signs up inside your home that says you will never discriminate on these grounds again. We got up and walked out, okay? That's what you're dealing with.
Oh my God.
Right.
And the other really kind of tragic part about the story is they were sued under the Public Accommodations Law, Chapter 489, which is for hotels, motels, and other places of transient accommodation. That was the part of the Public Accommodation Law that was applied to her home. But there happens to be a second anti-discrimination law that was more applicable to her home. It's Chapter 515, which is discrimination in real estate transactions. And that law, actually passed by this body, the legislature, provided that if you lived in your home and you rented 4 or fewer rooms, you were completely exempt from the non-discrimination provisions. So we defended the Youngs at the Civil Rights Commission with that and constitutional protections. And the Civil Rights Commission took the position that the Public Accommodations Law applied. And then instead of rendering a ruling that we could appeal if we didn't like, they allowed the plaintiffs to file lawsuit in court. So they filed the lawsuit in court. And on the same day that the complaint was filed, the Civil Rights Commission filed a motion to intervene as plaintiffs against the Youngs. So before the Youngs were even served with the complaint, the state of Hawaii was joining the case against them. So we had motions for summary judgment at the trial court. They were arguing Chapter 489 applied. We were arguing Chapter 515 applied, and she's exempt. The judge actually ruled that 489 applied, believe it or not, even though she's not a public building. The definition of bed and breakfast home in the City and County of Honolulu zoning code excludes bed and breakfast homes from transient accommodations. So that actual ruling is on appeal right now before the Intermediate Court of Appeals. We filed our opening brief. The other side's going to file their brief in the next month or so.
Okay, so we don't have to go to Vermont to see a real live example.
You also you might know this, but civil union refusal has led to a church being sued at the Civil Rights Commission. But the problem is that's a confidential proceeding. So nobody knows about the first 3 years of these cases because they're confidential until they get into the court system, and then they're public.
Given what you said about the bed and breakfast, I don't know if I should revise my question or still ask it, because I was getting the impression as you were speaking that under the civil unions there was a live and let live tolerance, and then after the same-sex marriage came in, it kind of like made the dividing lines of divisiveness and...
Yeah, no, it was a mixed bag when you had civil unions. But when you get same-sex marriage, it's not a mixed bag. It's full on. It's full on. There's no tolerance for people of faith and who actually bring their faith and can't provide a service in which they'll be communicating something that violates their sincerely held religious beliefs.
And you know, in the Julea Ward case, the Sixth Circuit opinion actually said tolerance is a two-way street. Otherwise, the government is issuing orthodoxy on the issue. And that's what it is.
I've got a question for you. The First Amendment is, with regard to speech, is very broad. In fact, it includes flag burning, which is an action, not a speech, right? I mean, it's very, very broad, and rightly so, for our freedom of expression. It seems here, would you agree that the freedom of religious expression is being construed? First of all, your testimony is breathtaking. Breathtaking.
I could go on.
I mean, I hear this stuff. He's talking about religious exemptions all the time, and and then I hear these stories. It's breathtaking. It really is. I did not know this. I'm so glad you came, because I didn't know it was this bad. So, would you say the religious freedom, religious expression is construed rather narrowly? These cases, what you say to me, shouldn't even be in court.
Of course they shouldn't be. No, they shouldn't be. But what makes them, what gives them the cloak of legitimacy, and hopefully that it won't prevail, but what gives them the cloak of legitimacy is same-sex marriage. When you legitimize it, then to oppose it is discrimination. And if you oppose it as a business or somebody that's a covered entity under a public accommodation law, then it becomes discrimination. Well, of course it's not. It's you exercising your right to disagree and speak out against something and not have to participate in promoting a message.
Is the conflict between this long-established right, clearly articulated in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and this newly formed right, and here you have this clash, and religion seems to be, the freedom of expression seems to be losing. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, it is, and it's very interesting when if you look at, when you look at same-sex marriage regimes and the whole sexual orientation, anti-discrimination statute, the people that are always losing are the people of faith. Something's wrong with that.
Yeah.
When our first liberty is the free exercise of religion.
Okay, let's close it up here. Let's drill back home. You've had a chance to look at the recent drafts, maybe. I know you've looked at the original bill. Do you agree that this legislation fails to adequately protect the photographer, the shopkeeper? I mean, it's a rhetorical question.
It's obvious. It's appalling.
Yeah, there's really no protection.
No.
And with regard to the religious, for the sanctuaries and the pastors and the preachers, I've brought this scenario up. Tell me if, based on your reading of this, that within 5 years, someone, two men could go to a church and say, we want to get married. And the Father Teddy would be there. Well, we love you. You're precious human beings. You're members of our flock. It goes against our catechism. We can't marry you. Thank you. They'll go sue, and we'll get a judge here, and he'll say, you know what? You can do whatever you want inside those doors, your magic show, whatever. But I can no longer enfranchise you with the civil authority to conduct a marriage because you are engaging in discrimination. So you can call it whatever you want, but I can no longer give you that civic label because the state can't be party to that.
Right.
Is that a stretch?
No, it would be naive to think otherwise. It would be naive to
think otherwise.
That's not going to happen.
Okay. Well, I'm called naive a lot around here, just so you know.
Yeah. No, I mean, think about it. If you look at the exemptions in the current bill, I mean, when I say they're appalling, they say, well, you know, a church won't have to solemnize same-sex wedding in their facilities as long as they don't do it for a profit. But it doesn't protect them, does it, if somebody wants to have the reception at the church, does it? You see that? Yeah. So what they do is they bring out, you know, two little gimmies, and it's really a dog and pony show to make you think that they gave you religious freedom.
Let me ask you a question. I was at a church today inside the sanctuary for a legislative briefing held by one of my Democratic colleagues who I respect and admire. I was served food. I didn't have to pay for it. I got to use the restroom. And no religious service took place. It was a legislative briefing. Is that now a public accommodation?
Well, I'd have to take a hard look at your public accommodation law, but
I mean, it's not a church service. So he's opened it up to other venues now.
Yeah, sure.
So the point is he's opened it up to non-religious.
Arguably.
Yeah. He's opened it up.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you so very much. This is breathtaking.
Could I just finish with this? Here's the solution to this problem, and I know it's difficult. Don't pass same-sex marriage.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have, from the legal side, we go to the professorial and the sociological. We have a professor from the University of Texas, professor, and I always miss the pronunciation of it, Regnerus or Regnerus, or Regnerus? Regnerus. Professor, we understand that you are the founder of the New Family Structure Study, or the conductor of that, and that's given you quite a reputation.
It has.
So,
could you explain to us what, as you do your opening statement, for us novices, what a peer-reviewed study is,
right.
Why it has to meet certain academic standards, the publication in journals and things. For a layman like me, until I got involved in this, I didn't know the difference between a civil beat study and
right.
new.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will make sure I cover that. All right. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Mark Regnerus. I'm an associate professor of sociology at the University of Texas at Austin and a senior fellow at the Austin Institute for the Study of Family and Culture. Like Lynn, I too am not representing those organizations, but rather speaking as a scholar of family and sexual behavior. I'm also author of a study, a peer-reviewed study, published last year in the journal Social Science Research. By blind peer review, we mean we send it out for review, and the editor decides to solicit reviews from people and doesn't tell us who is doing the review. And some journals, not this particular journal, the reviewers don't know either. That would be called a double-blind review. With this particular journal, the reviewers were allowed to know my identity, but I was not informed of who they were. So that article was published last year. It evaluated adult children who reported a parent who had had a same-sex romantic relationship. While I can affirm firsthand the terribly politicized environment of doing social science research in this area, I can also inform you that progress is being made in the social science scientific study of same-sex parenting. We are learning more about diverse household arrangements. Indeed, only in the last 3 years have we witnessed the publication of peer-reviewed studies that assess children's outcomes of having lived in a same-sex household or having witnessed the same-sex relationship of a parent using data from large, nationally representative samples. Sociologists would call those kinds of samples gold standard, the benchmark against which studies typically are measured. So 3 years, which has generated 3 large-scale studies: the United States Census, Canadian Census, and the New Family Structures Study, which I was principal investigator for. Virtually everything that came before that were studies of either small groups of people or groups of people who wanted to be studied and signed up to be evaluated. Not exactly the kind of data that return objective information and can tell us what's going on in the population at large. Indeed, small studies are often unable to even detect genuine differences that exist between groups. That is not ideal for science in this domain. But that was the case up until about 3 years ago, when larger studies were undertaken, one of which I oversaw myself. So what have we learned from those large nationally representative data sets? First, we learned from an analysis of the US Census that there was no difference in the likelihood of children from same-sex or opposite-sex couple households to have failed a grade in school. Was no difference, or so we thought. 3 professors of economics, however, reanalyzed that census data and found that children from same-sex homes were about 35% more likely to fail a grade when compared with children from intact, opposite-sex married homes. Children from same-sex homes fared about on par with children from single-parent homes. Why the difference in the first analysts and the 3 economists was largely due to the subjective decision of the first analyst, who did not include children who had moved residences in the past 5 years. We've learned, however, that same-sex couples with children exhibit greater residential and relational instability than do opposite-sex couples with children. Second, we learned from the study I oversaw in 2011 and 2012 that instability was not only an issue in the census, but it was also an issue in my population-based sample of Americans aged 18 to 39. Those young adults who reported having lived with their mother and her same-sex partner were more apt to have experienced a host of maladies as youth and then as young adults, when compared with the young adult children of still married mothers and fathers. How much more? 70% of those who had who lived with their mother and her same-sex partner for some point in time, 70% of them reported leaning on public assistance at some point while growing up, compared with 17% of kids from intact biological married families. 17 versus 70. 49% of the kids who had a mother and a mother's partner in their household said they were on public assistance today as adults, compared with 10% of those who grew up with an intact biological family. Basically 50% versus 10%. 27% of that first group reported being forced to have sex at some point in their life, compared with 8% of those from intact biological families. In other words, they were more vulnerable to sexual violence, the sources of which are unclear. Those who lived with their mother and her partner were also apt to report more modest academic achievement. Far greater unemployment as an adult, 40% current unemployment. More brushes with the law, poorer physical health practices like smoking. They were also more apt to report a negative assessment of their childhood years and the family life while they were growing up. Now, we can certainly have a civil discussion about why these things are true, but the basic point is that they are true. There are differences, and only sizable studies of the population of same-sex households at large have been in a position to detect these differences. small studies of non-random groups are not able to detect it. So, my study raised a ruckus, to put it mildly. Some critics complained loudly that I was comparing apples to oranges. That is, children who grew up in stably coupled married households versus kids who grew up in unstable households. This is true, but not because we did not make a valiant effort. In fact, we surveyed over 15,000 young Americans, 248 of whom reported a parental same-sex relationship. Only about a dozen of those 248 told us they lived with their mother and her partner together consecutively for at least 10 years. Such instability is not only the case in the United States, where we are known for our unstable relationships. It's also not a function of access to marriage either. It appears rather to be a matter of gender pairings. In other words, this is not about sexual orientation. This is about gender. A study of Norwegian and Swedish same-sex marriages notes that divorce risk is higher in same-sex marriages, and that, quote, risk of divorce for female partnerships is more than twice that for male unions. Moreover, early same-sex marriages, those occurring shortly after a change in same-sex marriage law, exhibited a similar risk of divorce as did more recent marriages, suggesting no notable variation in instability over time as a function of new law or pent-up demand among the most stable, long-standing relationships. The study authors estimated that in Sweden, 30% of female same-sex marriages are likely to end in divorce within 6 years of formation, compared with 20% for male same-sex marriages and 13% for heterosexual ones. 30, 20, 13. A Stanford demographer recently detected the same pattern in a study of nationally representative data on American relationships, presented at the 2012 annual meeting of the American Sociological Association. He found that female same-sex couples reported both higher relationship satisfaction and higher breakup rates. The highest stability rates appeared among heterosexual married couples. While female couples in his study were more apt to be raising children, the presence of those children did not appear to foster greater relationship stability among them. Third, the Canadian census. A study by Canadian economist Douglas Allen was published just last month in the journal Review of the Economics of the Household. It revealed that the children of gay and lesbian couples are only about 65% as likely to have graduated high school as the children of married, opposite-sex couples. Unlike the American studies, this one evaluated census data from Canada, where same-sex couples have had access to all taxation and government benefits since 1997 and have had access to same-sex marriage since 2005. It is the most optimal test case that we have seen yet, where we can look at data from a country similar to ours, but one which has already moved forward with same-sex marriage. The study reveals that the children of married, opposite-sex families have the highest graduation rate compared to the other types of households. On the other hand, children of lesbian couples have a low graduation rate compared to other types. In between those two are the children of the other four types: common law couples, gay couples, single mothers, and single fathers. The most unique aspect of Professor Allen's study, however, is its ability to distinguish gender-specific effects. So although the children of same-sex couples fared worse overall, the disparity is unequally shared. Boys fared better, that is, they're more likely to graduate high school. Boys fared better in gay couple households than in lesbian households. For girls, the opposite was true. They fared better in lesbian couple households than gay couple households. Thus, the study not only undermines the claim of no differences, it also questions scholarly assertions that moms and dads are interchangeable. They may not be as interchangeable as a lot of people like to think. So 3 general conclusions from the social sciences here. First, there is reason for concern. While same-sex households with children are a small population to study, we're talking a minority and then a minority of a minority, those who have children. Most studies are hindered in making strong claims for that very reason. It's a difficult population to locate randomly. But what we've seen in large-scale studies from the US, Canada, and Europe suggests there are reasons to be cautious about very confident claims that the children are just fine and that same-sex and opposite-sex couples experience identical household and relationship dynamics. It appears that they may not. Second, gender matters. It matters for relationships. It matters for children. Moms and dads may well be unique in their influence on children and not interchangeable. Sometimes the folk wisdom about a mom and a dad is correct. They are different. Legal efforts to refer to a mother, to a woman as a father or a man as a mother are nonsensical. Third, there is a great deal that we do not know. The social science of same-sex parenting is quite young and subject to significant limitations about what can be known. It is possible that in reality, social reality, there really are 2 gold standards: a stably coupled opposite-sex married family and stably coupled lesbian and gay households. But no population-based sample analyses has yet widely confirmed the presence of the latter. Moreover, a lot of what we knew up till 3 years ago was about soft outcomes, like how parents share household tasks, parental opinions of their children's development, and how children feel towards their mother or father. It's no revelation that parents of all sorts are proud of their children, and that kids love their parents, no matter what. But nobody here is interested in splitting up families that already have children. So let's not make this into something it's not. Indeed, states already recognize the rights of adults to do as they please in their personal relationships. What is missing in the national conversation about same-sex marriage is the question of the good things to which children ought to be entitled. Should children ideally have a mom and a dad? I think very few of us would say that the presence of our own mothers or fathers, or their absence, did not matter, that it was irrelevant. They did matter. They are relevant. It seems like a modest request, a mom and a dad. It used to happen pretty naturally. We didn't have to think about it or legislate toward that end. That's because marriage has long served as the legal means by which children are united to their biological mothers and fathers, and thus poised for optimal development. Now, all of us here can recognize that those biological ties between mothers, fathers, and children can be broken, sometimes with intention, sometimes by accident, through the death of a parent, sometimes by necessity, in order to protect a child from a parent, all through no fault of that child. A good society struggles over the ways by which communities ought to manage broken kinship ties. But a good society does not respond by blindly declaring that real biological bonds between mothers, fathers, and children are irrelevant, or that the consequences of broken bonds are imaginary. They are relevant. They aren't imaginary. All other arrangements are a concession and have long been understood as such. With so many significant outstanding questions and concerns about whether children develop as well in same-sex households as in opposite-sex households, it remains prudent for governments continue to recognize marriage as a union of a man and a woman, thereby promoting what is known to be an ideal environment for raising children, rather than taking the risk that the wishes of adults are more important and more basic and fundamental than the rights of a child to a mother and a father. Thank you.
Wow.
Richard, do you have any questions?
That was very good.
Yeah.
I have a question based on, you know, your use of the word gender, right? You use the term opposite gender. In your expertise and what you know and understand, is gender arbitrary? Can I, you know, because I feel like a woman inside today, can I wake up tomorrow morning and say I'm a woman today?
Yeah, I'm not going to pursue that too far. I mean, my specialty is the study of sexual behavior, basically. And so the study that I conducted was a study that evaluated the romantic relationship behavior of kids' parents. So,
well, when you use
I feel
when you use the term gender, what are you referring to?
I'm referring to sex here, but when we talk about sexual behavior and also sex, it's really kind of confusing. So I usually typically use use gender when I mean the sex of.
And you're referring to anatomical differences,
male
not
and female, correct.
Okay.
A couple of methodological questions.
Sure.
Generally, when you talk about dropouts or unemployment or less education, generally those are socioeconomic factors. I'm
Sure.
going to ask the obvious. You obviously controlled for that, or did you?
I controlled in my regression analyses for mother's education, which is sort of a social class indicator, as well as the perceived income of their parents while they were growing up.
So something is going, because that's, I did my PhD at the University of Hawaii in the sociology department.
Right.
And the only variable that really was ever predictable was socioeconomic status. Take income and take education, you can almost predict everything and you can dissect the whole of community.
Right.
What is interesting here, and I want to see if I've understood it, is that when you said boys fared better when they were raised by gay men.
This was from the Canadian census, which is not the study that I conducted.
Okay, not your studies.
Okay,
but
correct.
So you haven't verified that, but is that a phenomenon that rings to your sociological sense?
Which phenomenon?
The boys fared better when they were raised in gay families than the girls who were raised in gay men families, and the girls raised in lesbian families did better when they had girls raised.
If I was going to predict it, that's what I would have predicted.
Something's going on in the mother-father role there. What's
none of these data are poised to evaluate longitudinal sort of causation sorts of things, so we're left to largely speculate about some of this stuff.
It's too new of a field, in effect.
In some ways, and I mean, we think about what does the ideal study look like. The ideal study tracks lots of people over a long period of time, and we're just not remotely in a position to do that yet. I mean, the scholarship in this stuff is very new. But one of the unique things about that census analyses was it was able to, tease apart differential outcomes for kids based on their own gender or their sex and the sex of the parents they were living with, right? So it didn't surprise me that boys fare better with two men than girls did, and vice versa. I mean, a lot of this has to do with sort of modeling, right? I mean, and people seem,
the world modeling.
Yeah. So, without having to get too much into why that is, suffice to say, in my line of work, I think a lot of it has to do with: is it two men? Is it two women? Is it a man and a woman? Not so much what their orientation is, not so much sort of is this about homosexuality or not. It's about, from my angle, gender, basically, and gender combinations. And, yeah.
And stability in those relationships.
There are combinations that lend themselves to greater instability. And that's been documented in the United States and in Europe.
Okay, so for a legislator like myself, right, I have, where I live, we have 79.3% of the kids in poverty. If I want to raise my community out of poverty, I mean, a lot of this, we have a lot of domestic issues, things like that. To promote raising my community out of poverty, getting kids better educated, those kinds of things. From a public policy perspective, I want to promote and enhance what type of relationship?
The mother-father married relationship.
The mother-father.
Because they have the most at stake, and they're the least likely to leave a child, least likely to abuse a child. There were sociologists at the University of Wisconsin, Princeton, wrote a book back in 1994, and they said, if we were going to design a system from scratch, we probably wouldn't come up with a better design than the married mother and father relationship.
With
Has
the
it
biological
all.
children.
Correct. Because once you reduce kinship, and all same-sex couples have reduced kinship because in some ways it is a step-parent arrangement with somebody, right? Reduced kinship lends itself to certain risks. That's just the data.
That's a reality.
That is a reality.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and traveling all this way. You are an unassuming, just the facts, ma'am, presentation. I don't want to speculate, which surprises me because the buildup I got from the media before you, I was expecting horns on the top of your head. I don't see them. But your study caused quite a stir.
Right.
I read, I got to tell you, I only read half of it. And
Fell asleep.
well, I didn't fall asleep, but as an adoptive father,
Right.
I noticed that the indicators for some of my adoptive children, that jumped out at me. They're a higher risk because of the kinship issue you talk about.
Right.
And you're very matter-of-fact about that. First of all, thank you for your courage. In undergoing this in the academic world, have you been called a bigot, homophobe, and hater?
I mean,
You're-
more days than
As you're so matter of fact, and I don't want to talk about that, just the data. You've been accused of having your numbers rigged, right? And everything under the sun.
right. But mostly that's been by people who are outside of the academy. I mean,
Well, no, I mean on the blogs.
right.
Yeah, I mean everybody. Well, look at his sampling. He's done all this.
I made my data public a year ago,
Right,
so scholars have access to it.
right. And I thank you. These other studies you refer to, I'm familiar with the studies done in Berkeley with a small sampling of
Correct.
upper income, $150,000 a year lesbian couples, like 15 of them, and the kids do fantastic. 78. Okay, so you know the study I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And it's such a small sample. And what you here today tell us is that we've done this huge sample, and this is what we're finding. And you're also saying this is really new. This is
It is
uncharted territory.
I mean, one of the frustrating things in terms of the scholarly standpoint is this particular study that you're referring to has been in 19 different peer-reviewed publications. So I put forward one that really significantly contests that, and it's easy for the scholarly community to fall back and say, well, this is 19 versus 1, the overwhelming evidence. But the overwhelming evidence has come from studies of people who basically volunteered to sign up. And that's just not how social science works. And I have heard privately from plenty of social scientists, it's like, yeah, we know that that analysis has issues. But this is a popular project in the wider academy. So I'm not surprised that there was less criticism of small studies of non-random samples than terrific criticism I received for a random sample, nationally represented, talked to 15,000 people. So
15,000 people, nationally representative sample. And would you agree with the statement that all things being equal, based on your data, that a child does best with a loving mother and father in a married, long-term committed relationship?
we certainly know that, right? But what we don't know is how many stably coupled same-sex households there are, and what the children from them look like. Because despite our best efforts, we haven't been able to get enough of them randomly to take a closer look.
Okay.
So that's part of the problem of surveying small populations and minorities of those populations who are actually parents, because less than half of them are parents on average. So, new science, I think you should go with what you know.
Thank you. Anything else, good?
One last question. This is what makes the biological ties so strong? Because this is, and I've heard this. I don't know if this is like an official study, but like, no matter how much you don't like a family member, right? And if they're in a burning house with a bunch of your friends, the natural inclination is you're still going to go rescue your family member first before you rescue any non-related. I feel that way about my brother, you know, except maybe I might prove that study wrong. You know, sometimes I get some days with my older brother, I feel like, you know, let it burn. But I don't you know, someday there is something about those. What is it with biological connections that make them so strong?
There's a variety of speculation about this. Probably the most significant comes from the evolutionary psychology side. That these, you know, kinship is rooted in the genes, and we have long-term stable interests in seeing ourselves and our families continue. So the literature in evolutionary psychology has always made sense to me from that angle, and sociologists tend not to look into that because we are operating with current data, and so it's a speculative decision.
Yeah, why do you say it's speculation? Like, I mean, this is something that is so basic and fundamental to human existence, and yet you say we speculate on what causes it. We don't even understand. Because
using social science data, we don't tend to like to go beyond what the data can say. And so when we talk about causation, I mean, we're very hesitant to speak to causation because causation is a complicated thing.
You can't measure it.
Yeah, it's very difficult to measure. In this case, you would want to track people at multiple waves over a long period of time to even gain confidence in talking about causation. So I'm telling you speculation from a different discipline, psychology, about sort of the really deep-rootedness of family ties and biological ties. Now,
but that's, I mean, it's so interesting because you can know somebody that you didn't know. I mean, I've had this experience, and this is common in Pacific Islands, is you didn't know. I mean, I've been in rugby fights with people that I just wanted to pound the heck out, and then I found out they're you know, one of my grandmothers, you know, and then suddenly all that animosity just disappears.
Yeah. Right.
And suddenly we're like best buddies. I remember my little brother got knocked out by one of my cousins, and then when I wanted to beat him up, and then when I found out he's my cousin, I was like, oh, it's okay, yeah, you want to punch him again? But there's something very unique that we can't exactly put our finger on, that we can't understand. But if we run afoul of these things and start redefining something, we can destroy something that maybe can never be brought back, is what I'm concerned with.
Right. Understand.
Thank you, Dr. Professor. Thank you so very much. Okay. Now we have Mr. William Duncan, Director of Marriage and Law Foundation.
Mr. Duncan is a graduate of BYU Law School, taught at the Catholic University, and joined the Marriage Project, and is a co-founder of the Marriage Law Foundation. Welcome, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've learned a lot from this discussion, and I don't want to gild the lily by, you know, repeating a lot of things that have been said, although they've been extremely helpful. So maybe I thought I might diverge a little bit and talk about why this issue is so important here. The people in the mainland, why are we so interested in what's happening in Hawaii? When I started my legal career in 1998, Hawaii was going through, it had been a long process of a number of years, I think starting really in 1996 in the legislature, taking maybe even before that, three or four years. That's going to be an interesting number to think about, I think. And the question was, are we going to allow the courts, and in fact just a very small minority of the Hawaii Supreme Court, to order the state to change its definition of marriage? That was the question. The people of the state were given the chance to weigh in on that question, and they did in a resounding way. In many ways, then, this state was a pioneer for the other states that have come since and amended their state constitutions to protect the understanding of marriage as the union of a husband and wife. And that definition is not something that was just created by a state, by a government. It predates government. And in fact, we could look and say, well, why is it true that kind of universally every culture seems to have some version of marriage? It's not because people are full of hatred and ill will towards people they disagree with, and they all just sort of, in all cultures across all times, they decided to get together and have a conspiracy against the people who feel differently. They decided that they're trying to respond to very significant realities. The reality that children need a mother and father, that husbands and wives create children, that men and women create children, they may or may not support them. But with marriage, as Professor Regnerus pointed out, marriage is our way of channeling people into the relationship that provides children's interests and prioritizes those over adult interests. That's what marriage is about. Now, as we think about some of the questions that are being discussed here, we think about religious liberty, and we say, why is it that religious people are so concerned about this issue? They're not, as we've heard demonstrated beautifully a number of times tonight, they're not interested in hurting people who are different than they are. They're anxious to preserve something that's important. They believe they have a sacred obligation. They believe that in every part of their lives they're accountable to God for their actions. That means that they're going to treat others with kindness, with respect and dignity, but it also means that they have to recognize some very basic realities. The basic reality that children deserve a mother and father. That's not something we have the ability to take away from them. So given all of that, what I want to try and bring some numbers together. So the one number we've talked about already is 3, and I'm not going to necessarily stand by whether it was 3 years, but it took a long time, a lot of deliberation, a lot of back and forth, and ultimately the decision of the people, the voters of Hawaii, to settle this question and to take it away from the courts. Now we're expected that we're looking at a process now where in 6 days that question is going to be taken away from the people and decided in a very unusual process, as these questions that are noted here I think are meant to point out to us that this is a very unusual process. Comes up occasionally, but only in kind of emergency situations. There's no emergency here. In that process, we're going to put off, if the bill is approved, we're going to put off the wisdom of millennia about what marriage is and what children need. In addition to that, we're going to approve a legal regime that not only leaves all the holes that have been described, and I have a list of others too. I think 10 more that weren't even mentioned today. I'll read some of them. Withdrawal of government benefits. That's happened in other states. Denial of access to facilities. Public officials, what about them? What if they want to act on their beliefs as they go about their work? We've talked about small businesses. What about employment benefits? Does a religious employer have to give benefits to employees? Religious nonprofits. What if they want to run a soup kitchen? They want to act according to their beliefs, but this law is telling them no. Licensing, accreditation for schools, parents and their ability to control with their children here in schools. Tax-exempt status, private lawsuits that again have been described. All of those questions. In 6 days, those are all supposed to be settled, and the only proposals that we have so far have in the first place said, well, you get 1.5 exemptions out of all of those maybe 15 items. You get 1.5. We won't force clergy to perform weddings, and in some very limited cases we won't force religious facilities to be used for weddings only. There's nothing in the bill that protects them from having to be used for receptions, for counseling, all of those things not covered. Enormous holes. And all of this in a emergency kind of proceeding without any significant input, the kind of input that it really would take to make a decision of that magnitude. And I think that may be just that perspective that I have looking at this over decades, watching what's happened in other states, which have much broader exemptions, even if they're certainly not good enough. But all of this is happening in this very, very quick process. And I think that may give you some sense of why so many people are so worried about what's happening in this process. In this last Supreme Court session, one of the justices made a point that I think is really true, and that is that it's easy to paint people you disagree with as monsters, to say they're different, their views are backwards, they're bigoted, they're hatred, they're discrimination. It's much harder to try and understand where people are coming from. And I hope that as we try and think about why everybody has recognized marriage the way it is, that has understood marriage to be the union of a husband and wife. Why is that? Why do religious people care so much about this issue, even though they're not? It's not hatred. It's out of love. Why are those things the case? And when we begin to understand those, then the questions become much easier. But when we allow ourselves to believe that everyone who's different from us is a bad person, that's how we get in the situation I think we're in now on this issue.
No, stay. We got questions. Richard, go ahead.
In the, I'm originally from the Kingdom of Tonga, okay, and in the discussions that we have had, do you have very much interaction with Pacific Islanders?
I do.
You do? Okay. In the discussions that we had with the governor, I asked the governor, a hypothetical question. I said, if the Kingdom of Hawaii was in existence today, would the Kingdom of Hawaii be more consistent in their position towards this matter with their Polynesian cousins, Tonga, Fiji, Samoa, Tuvalu, everywhere else? And they're not even touching this, with a 100-foot pole. And the Pacific Islands have a longer history with the homosexual community than the United States has been a country, right? So we've had that. So I explained to him, why, if that were the case, and then he didn't answer the question. But then after that, he said that those who oppose this bill are unenlightened. I took exception with that. Sure. Okay. Do you feel Pacific Islanders to be unenlightened, and they are backwards in their approach?
No, and well, let me say categorically no, of course not. And I would actually say something maybe even a little stronger, and that is, why would we ever assume that people who have managed to maintain and pass down from generation to generation a system that ensures the most fundamental right of a child, the right to have a relationship with a mother and father, who are committed to each other and not a fleeting relationship, why would we ever assume that people who can do that are unenlightened? It doesn't make any sense at all. And in fact, I think a truly enlightened person knows that you just have to look at this experience in the past and say, why would that be? It can't possibly be because, and you've described this well already, it can't possibly be because that somehow in the long distant past, Adam and Eve or somebody got together and said, hey, how do we keep our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters from having rights? That's just not what happened. And to argue that, which is the implication of the argument made to you, it's ludicrous. It doesn't make any sense at all. That doesn't explain why every culture, every society has found a way to bring together mother and fathers for children. So that's where the enlightenment is understanding why this system has worked so well for so long. And unenlightenment, or I don't know if ignorance, is assuming we're going to come up with a better solution in in maybe a couple years, or in some cases a couple of days.
5 days. In this case.
Yes,
Yes, William, thank you for your presentation. You mentioned 6 days, like the 6-day war and 6 days. But actually, the schedule that we have today, and this is for everybody's edification, it's actually right now 8 days. The Senate will start on a Monday. We will get the Senate's version of the bill then on Thursday. And then we've got to go till the next Monday and then Wednesday to agree with the Senate or disagree. So it could even be longer. So now it's 8 days. It used to be five only. Now it was 6 yesterday, and today it's 8. Maybe tomorrow it'll be longer, but just stay tuned to that. This is just a comment on your number of 6.
Well, I should say I went to law school because I'm not good with math, so
The
I'll take
lawyers
that.
in the audience will disagree.
But it is interesting to watch this happen. You know, initially we had 1 1/4 religious exemptions in this bill, right, out of 12, and now we have 1 1/2. So who knows? Maybe after a couple of years, we'll actually get things covered. You know, if we continue to.
Well, that was my
work
next
this
question.
through.
Your thoughts on the particular bill? And
Well, I actually have some specific thoughts, and you know, I want to say it at the outset that there's no religious exemption that's going to solve this problem. I mean, there's a widespread understanding among scholars that when we redefine marriage, we're going to see heightened conflicts with the religious liberty. That's really unavoidable, and that's scholars who support same-sex marriage, who oppose same-sex marriage, who don't have a position. They all agree that's a given. Now, of course, different people have different opinions about what ought to happen as a result of that, but that part is not. There's no question there. What same-sex marriage does, and I think this has been described before, but the analogy I would use is climate change. Two things change in the climate. First, we say that people who have traditional understandings about sexual morality and specifically about the need of children to have a mother and father are bigots. So that's one piece. And the other piece is that we just have so many more opportunities for these people who are trying to live out their faith, again, to act on their belief that they're accountable to God for all their actions, for those people to run afoul of some law or other. Right? You might have been able to say, well, we believe in placing children with married couples, and so we're not violating any law. But of course, now when you change the definition of marriage, then there's a new conflict that wasn't there before. And this letter that went out to the legislators describes this in really significant, perhaps more detail than you need, but you know, I think runs 23 pages. But it's not like the legislature wasn't warned that this is a problem. The other problem that I think you see with the religious exemption that's supposedly provided in the bill is it's not always clear even that it does what it says it's going to do. So it says, well, clergy are exempted from solemnizing marriage. Well, solemnization is only the process of actually saying, I now pronounce you husband and wife. So what about a person who doesn't want, who's concerned because of their religious beliefs, they don't want to facilitate a marriage? And
So, you just struck me here. So, a Catholic priest could not ostensibly turn away the newly born adopted child of a same-sex couple for baptism because it's not explicitly protected.
This bill does not even talk about that. What about counseling? What about religious facilities used? I think I mentioned this before, but okay, they're not going to be used for solemnization. This was the supposed sort of concession. Receptions, nothing about that there.
Jim, could you come up to the mic for a second? Because this just, I didn't even think of this too.
And I have one.
No,
other
stay here.
thought
Stay here.
about
You're not off the hook yet.
All right.
Catholic Church. Oh, we got Father Gary Secor back there. Gary, thank you for coming. Catholic Church, we at Our Lady Perpetual Help, the baptism occurs before Mass. The parents bring the child in. They go through the ceremony. Same-sex couple is going to bring in their child to be baptized in the Catholic faith. And if the priest says, no, he's not explicitly protected, and they want that to be the blessing in front of the whole congregation, correct?
Well, I think that the government has no right to tell a church how to do a sacrament, period.
Well, I agree with you, but what
So-
we're saying is that's not covered.
I don't think that claim is going to be made in the near future. I think they're going to stay away from that.
You
Because
mean
that's
like the next week or?
years. But I think at some point the claim may be made.
Well, yeah.
Let me up that by one notch. I saw a few pastors, and some pastors are still here. They're, quote, known for marrying and burying. What about burial rights? What if a pastor is asked to do...
You know, there was a case, actually, where a Catholic priest was going to do a funeral, and the deceased mom's adult daughter came and introduced herself to the priest and introduced her lesbian girlfriend, and the priest told her that she couldn't have communion at the service. And he actually got in trouble from his bishop later.
But not sued?
No.
Can I make a final point on that? What I think is important, and we perhaps haven't paid enough attention to this yet, is who exactly is going to be enforcing this, right? It'll be the Human Rights Commission. And because of the vagueness of so many of these provisions, like if a church says, well, you know, we are not a public accommodation because we're not doing weddings for profit, right? And that's language in the bill. Who decides whether they're doing this for profit or not?
Hey, Bill, I can tell you in practice the way the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission would handle that. They would appoint an investigator. The investigator would come to the church and say, let me see your balance sheet.
Exactly right.
Do you have more revenue than expenditures? And what's crazy about that is the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs registers businesses as either corporations, partnerships, limited liability companies, and they register charities as nonprofit corporations. So there's not a single church that's for profit. So the test is going to be on a balance sheet test.
I get a question.
Which leads to a fishing expedition, right, every time someone tries to claim it.
I get a question. When the governor came before us in the same meeting I was in with Richard, I asked him, of course, he said all the questions have been asked and all the answers given. Well, you surprised us tonight because you brought up a few questions. But I asked him, I said, okay, if this is a civil right, Governor, as you say, then what is to stop the bisexual from wanting to marry their husband and wife and visiting him in the hospital and having all those things? What is it? And you know what he said? I fully expect a lawsuit within a year. You're smiling. My question is, if we create this new civil right and everyone is enfranchised with this civil right, what is the state's compelling interest to not permitting polygamy? And is the number of partners more important than the functionality?
Well, and I think that's the right question, and there's no answer to it. Because once you define marriage as the union of any two people for adult purposes, then you have to wonder, well, why is two so crucial? And I'll give you maybe a more specific, this might be varying a little in the family law, which I also teach, but the reality is that one of the reasons why every culture recognizes marriage as basically universally until very, very recently has recognized marriage as the union of a husband and wife is that those are the two halves of humanity it takes to create a child. When in an alternative kind of family arrangement, children you have to have some third party involved. So that's going to create is kind of inherently going to create challenges where you have three people who all want claim as parents of the child: the biological father, biological mother. Maybe the biological father's a sperm donor, but he's still the biological father. You have the biological mother, then maybe the mother's partner, maybe the father's partner, and all of those people will have some claim, and you do see this happening in states now where they're recognizing 3+ people as parents of a child. All of those people are going to have a claim. Why not, gosh, you know, if marriage is good for children, why not have all those people married to each other, or at least have some kind of relationship to one another? So I think there'll be very practical reasons why we will see exactly those kinds of lawsuits in the future. Now, I don't want to be confusing, because to me, redefining marriage to away from husband and wife is problematic in and of itself. If somehow we had some kryptonite guarantee that we would never recognize plural, unions or polyamorous unions and stuff, it would still be a problem that we would redefine marriage to.
No, I agree.
But
Agree.
but you're right. As
There's
a
no end to it.
philosophical matter, there's no way to cabin that. Once you say marriage is about what adults want, you've given the game away.
Fritz, it's a long day.
I'm half German.
Fritz is right. Jim and Fritz, if you guys would like to come up and opine on the version of the bill that you guys, you can stay here. And all of you now come up, or at the end. If you guys would like to engage in sort of a roundtable and talk about the bill and what we see in the latest iteration with regard to where we're going, religious protection, sort of, we still have some time. So maybe with all you smart guys up here, we might get a little good dialogue going.
Well, let me just say that Hawaii Family Advocates ran some polls this week, and we asked the question, essentially, should the legislature or the people decide on redefining marriage? 70%, and they were 100% registered voters in Hawaii, 70% said the people should decide this question. 20% said the legislature should, and 10% didn't know.
That's great news. Let the people decide.
Let the people decide on marriage, absolutely.
What are the inherent rights? Like,
Come on up, Fritz. Why don't you come up, ADF and Professor, come on up. I know we won't ask you any fortune-telling questions, because just statistically related. And is that all of our testifiers that we had tonight? Okay, all the smart guys.
Wait. I invited experts on the other side of the issue from ACLU, Lois Perrin. I didn't see Lois. Yeah, and after that, exactly. So this is not going to be a long. I know. This has been this is a wrap-up. This is not a elongated.
We'll stay till 9, but this is just a
I
wrap-up.
mentioned Bill Hoshijo. Bill couldn't make it. Also, Professor Ave Sober of the UH Law School was invited. He has not been able to make it. And our good friend, our colleague, former Representative Blake Oshiro. Blake has got another engagement at a different place. Otherwise, the governor's office was invited, and he was going to pass that on.
And I invited the superintendent and the chairman of the Board of Education. So they were all these folks were invited. I'm not shocked that they didn't.
Including all senators and all
representatives
members of the House.
So.
Okay, wrap up.
Well, I just have a quick question about the paternity issues. In the case of a same-sex couple that one of them has a biological child, and obviously there's a third biological parent. Do you use the term parent? Yeah, I mean, well, so you have another third person. Does, under the law, right, does the father or, well, in the case, let's say, same-sex couple, third person's biological parent of the child, is it automatically assumed under the law that all three have parental rights over the child?
Well, the classic understanding of parenting is you get two. One is a mother and one is a father. They're usually going to be biologically related except in exceptional circumstance, and that exceptional circumstance would only come up if that's in the child's best interest. And so those rules have always applied. The challenge with same-sex marriage is those rules don't make the same sense that they did. So in principle, no. In principle, you still only have two parents. That would make that child legally motherless or fatherless.
Well, who goes on the birth certificate?
Well, that's something that'll have to be worked out. It's another piece that's not in this bill, but of course it's going to have to be worked out.
If in the case of a same-sex couple, the same-sex people go on, and then the other biological parent comes a week later and challenges, does one of the parents lose parental rights, or one?
Yes. The answer to that question is yes. One of the parents is going to lose parental rights because the current version of the bill says exact treatment. If a same-sex couple is married, they have to be treated exactly as an opposite-sex married couple would. Even if it's logically impossible, what they're claiming, it still has to be.
Okay.
What we want to do is give each of you 3 to 5 minutes to kind of tie up your thoughts on this evening. And we'll start with Jim and go down the end. Tell us who you are. We know Jim, and Fritz, we don't know who you are. Well, I know who you are. And then what we'll do is open it up to the public to come and share your ideas with Gene and I. We'd like to hear what you have to say. And depending on how many people that were here, we're going to stay till 9, so depending on how many people, we'll get a raise of hands, and then we'll divide it by the time left, and there you go, okay?
And if these gentlemen are available, you can ask them directly questions. Otherwise, the panel will be asking questions.
Okay, Jim?
Okay, well, one thing that hasn't been mentioned in the bill, it's on page 5, Senate Bill 1, and it is line 16 to the bottom of the page and then over the top. And what that provision does is it allows a religious solemnizer to refuse to solemnize a marriage. But what is not covered is my LDS law school classmate, Bodhi Uwali, who happens to be a family court judge, and judges can solemnize as well. And you know, people who are not part of a religious organization but are people of faith personally who have licenses to solemnize have no protection in this bill at all. That's one thing that I think is really important. We talked about the religious exemption with all of this for-profit business where there's not a single church that's not a nonprofit. So I don't know what that test is there for. This is supposed to be a bill creating marriage between same-sex people. But on page 7, they're excluding uncles and nephews from marrying or aunts and nieces from marrying, which I don't get. If it's supposed to be a same-sex bill, what's wrong with those two sets of relationships that happen to be same-sex? On page 8, they've changed that a man and a woman to be married in the state shall have duly obtained a license. And in section 7, the marriage ceremony be performed in the state by a person or society with a valid license to solemnize marriages and the man and the woman. In both of those sections, they've changed the man and the woman to the plural parties, which looks like a time bomb for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8. They could have said the couple. And then on page 12, when in 2011, the state of Hawaii passed the Civil Unions Law, Act 1, and it created Chapter 572C. And in Section 2, this language was included, and it is currently in the statute, and it has to be taken out in order to do same-sex marriage. This is the language. The legislature finds that the people of Hawaii choose to preserve the tradition of marriage to a unique social institution based upon the committed union of one man and one woman. The legislature further finds that because of its unique status, marriage provides access to a multiplicity of rights and benefits throughout our laws that are contingent upon that status. As such, marriage should be subject to restrictions such as prohibiting respective parties to a valid marriage contract. And then they went on to say, however, even though that's all true, and they're reflecting the 1998 constitutional amendment vote, we want to do civil unions, so we're going to share those benefits around. But when the Attorney General rendered his opinion on whether the legislature has the power to legislatively amend the definition of marriage, and he walked through the entire history of same-sex marriage issues in Hawaii, he totally ignored these findings from 2011 that are being taken out of the law in his version of the bill that he wrote for the governor. And so I think we need to take his opinion with a huge ton of salt, because he left out a glaring legislative finding. We talked about the inability of the court in a divorce of a same-sex couple that was married here but live in another state to have the ability to enforce a divorce decree order. But in this bill, if both of the spouses that don't live here agree to personal jurisdiction in the court will also rule on child custody issues, child support issues, spousal support issues, with never having seen these people, having not talked to these people. They'll issue an order, and somebody's going to lose. And perhaps Bill Duncan can talk about this. When somebody loses the child custody question, do they voluntarily always turn the kid over? I don't think they do. And in order for this court in Hawaii to enforce the order that the child be turned over to the winning custodial parent, they have to hire a lawyer in that state to make the order from this state enforceable in that state, and then pay that lawyer to have it enforced, where these people who don't live here don't pay taxes here. So we get to pay for all that.
Any idea how much the average divorce case costs the state?
You know what? It probably depends on the lawyers, to tell you the truth. I think it does.
The average, though.
I don't know. I don't do
mean
divorce
that-
work. I don't. But
Yeah.
Bill Duncan probably knows.
I don't know. I don't know offhand.
I'm not talking about the attorney's fees. I'm just talking about the labor in the state, the records, the processing, the filing, all those things.
I don't know the answer. It'll be far, far, far more than the license would cover, and with this super jurisdiction where Hawaii then now becomes the place where anybody can settle their same-sex divorce arrangements, that number is going to be significant, and every how often I'm sad to say this is embarrassing. One of the reasons we're in this position is so many people get divorced. And we've lost kind of the plot of marriage as a culture already in many ways, unfortunately. But you see people continually coming back over and over and over again for a new hearing, or they want this little, I don't like the way that they're exercising their visitation. And so, every time that happens, you're going to have another charge on the state. It's a real, and not to mention the problems with, there's federal law, of course, that governs which states custody arrangements apply. I think you're going to have terrible litigation over the Parental Kidnapping Prevention Act too. I don't know if that's.
And then I had one last thought too that I wanted to share, and that is, under the two same-sex marriage Hawaii Supreme Court rulings, Bear v. Lewin and Bear v. Miki, there's absolutely no civil rights issue with reserving marriage to opposite-sex couples. Stephen Levinson in 1993 in Bear v. Lewin said there is no fundamental right to same-sex marriage under the state constitution. And then he created the equal protection problem for the rights and the benefits. We amended the Constitution to say the legislature shall have the power to reserve marriage to opposite-sex couples. That same-sex marriage lawsuit was still in the Supreme Court, and a few months later the Supreme Court dismissed the case, saying the constitutional amendment took the question of marital benefits out of the ambit of the Equal Protection Clause. You don't have to do anything for civil rights or legal reasons.
Understood. Mr. Religious Liberty O'Reilly.
Yes.
Bed and breakfast.
Yeah, my name is actually Byron Babon. I represented the O'Reillys. Listen, my earlier testimony, what I intended to do was to dispense with a couple myths. One, that same-sex marriage is not a threat to religious freedom. It most surely is, and as I said before, it really puts the non-discrimination laws into overdrive. The other thing was that the other myth was that this bill somehow protects religious liberty. It's paltry when it comes to doing that, and we discussed that. But there's a third thing, a third myth that I would like to dispense with too, and that is the idea that if you don't allow same-sex couples to marry, there's an equality problem, that you've created some kind of equality principle. And I just want to make this really simple, and I think it's important for legislators and for people to understand. There's no equal protection violation. There's no equality problem when you treat something that is, when you treat two things that are different differently. Okay? There's an equal protection problem when you treat two things that are the same differently. And so opposite-sex couples do something very, very differently from same-sex couples, and that is they procreate. That's a fundamental difference, a huge, massive difference between those two people. So when you preserve marriage for opposite-sex couples, marriage between a man and a woman, for the purpose of encouraging responsible procreation, and that is the purpose of civil marriage. That is the purpose of civil marriage. You're treating them differently with respect to the state's purpose because procreation is not implicated by same-sex couples. So there is no equality violation. that the two are so different when it comes to the state's interest, which is responsible procreation.
And the state has a compelling interest because if the parents don't take care of the child, they become a ward of the state.
Absolutely. Listen, heterosexual sex brings, it's a two-edged sword. It brings a great blessing. It brings people to the world. It brings taxpayers to the world. It brings good citizens to the world. But it could also bring children to the world who go unparented. So the state has a compelling interest in having a mechanism called marriage to bring the mother and father that have had children to make them legally bound to raise their children.
Because
those interests are not implicated by same-sex couples because they're not implicated by same-sex sex.
Right, and it's necessarily possible in healthy young male-female adults where, because they're going to say, well, what about older people? You say,
Right.
well,
Right. Well, listen, you hear the exceptions. Well, you know, some people don't want to have children. Some people can't have children because of infertility issues. But a lot of people that say that they're not going to have children, guess what? They end up having children.
Yeah.
A lot of people that have infertility issues end up solving those issues and have children. And even with older people, they are still modeling the relationship that leads to responsible procreation. And so they still serve the government interest in that way. I think the important thing and the way to remember this is that you are not violating equal protection when you treat things that are different differently. Okay? You're only doing it when you treat things that are the same differently. Opposite sex couples and same sex couples are not the same with respect to the government's compelling interest in responsible procreation.
Thank you so much. Mr. Duncan, you have some final thoughts?
Well, I want to set an example. I really do think that this issue would be better handled by the people of the state, so I'll just
let the people decide.
Have a say
Okay.
tonight. So.
Before the sociologist comes in, I got to ask one question, because all the data that I've read seems to indicate people are running away from marriage. There are less than half of the people, or maybe half of the people, who are married now. And is the trend where, okay, same-sex marriage will become legal, and then that will basically fade off or back off?
Right.
Because isn't the demographics, you guys do a lot of demographics.
I was about to punt to the people too, but you asked a question, so I'll answer it.
Yes.
Yeah, there appears to be a general deinstitutionalization of marriage and family going on right now. And in the last decade, we've 1% decline each year in the share of people between the ages of 25 and 34 who are married. So 10% in 10 years, which is a pretty significant drop. So from my angle as a scholar, I look at the issue of same-sex marriage as part of the process of deinstitutionalization. People who favor same-sex marriage think, oh, this is exactly what we need, a revival of marriage. I think, you know, I think this is part of the process of where it is receding in the culture. So I'll leave it at that and let the folks speak.
Fritz, do you have any thoughts? We didn't give you much time on the mic.
Well, having been a attorney in this august body, the State House, and also for the State Senate, and being involved in the political process, and I also filed a amicus brief in the Bear versus Meiki case. So I've been involved in this issue for about 20 years. And one of the most miraculous occurrences was to have that constitutional amendment approved by the legislature in 1998 and then ratified by the general public. As you know, our constitutional amendments have to have more than 50% of the people who actually have ballots. So every election, in any election, you're going to have some spoiled ballots. And those that vote in favor have to exceed the spoiled ballots and the non-filled out ballots and the no ballots. And as we know, the number was close to 70% in favor. And so since that time, this issue, the issue has changed a little bit with the onset of civil unions. But the entire structure of our government, both state and federal, is the notion is that the sovereignty resides in the people, and the government is set up with various checks and balances, but with the notion that the people are really the rulers. We don't have a monarch where all power flows from a single individual. The power comes up through the people. And so the notion of letting the people decide, I think, is a very powerful and compelling concept, especially when you're talking about a major societal change like we're talking about in this case with redefining what marriage means. What a lot of people don't know, and I've been interested because I've talked to other lawyers who I sometimes would assume would understand some of this process, but even lawyers who've been practicing for many years are surprised, as are many lay people, that there is no procedure in Hawaii for the voters themselves to place an initiative or a referendum or a constitutional amendment on the ballot. There's only two real mechanisms for that. One is to go through the legislature. So you have to have 2/3 of each house if it's done in a single year, or if you go through 2 years, if you get a majority in both houses for both years. Then the question has to be placed on the ballot. It's almost like the people have a veto right over what the legislature has decided that it wants to change, although that really wasn't what happened in '98. I think what had happened in '98 was there were a number of people that voted for the amendment that would have preferred not to have, but I think they felt that it made sense to allow the people to have their say on the matter. And I think that logic would apply here. That the only other means of amending the Constitution, or for the people to have some other avenue, is through a constitutional convention, and that issue comes up every 10 years, whether the people want to have a constitutional convention. And obviously entities, institutions that have a vested interest in keeping the Constitution in the same way it is now, they are always going to be opposed to having a constitutional convention, and there's additional expense to it. But that is the only means whereby people can weigh in. And so the mechanism, and I think you're going to be introducing a bill that would provide a means where the people could weigh in on a constitutional amendment. I think your amendment would eliminate the legislature shall have the power and simply state what marriage is in the state constitution. And I would just say that's a very viable and thoughtful way to present it to the people. And I would hope that your colleagues would give that some careful consideration, because again, on an issue of this magnitude and importance, it's a good thing. It's a good thing for the entire society to participate, win or lose, because people will feel that they had a voice rather than having something rushed through in a fast track over a 5, 6, 8, whatever it's going to be, special session. I think that's the worst type of political legislative management that I can imagine.
Yeah. Let's give all these guys a hand. Thank you. Okay, Gene and I are going to stick around till 9 o'clock. We have the room till 9, so if anybody wants to come up, I want to see a show of hands. How many folks would like to talk to us? We got 1, 2, our Rotary friend. 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Todd. So we got 7 people, so 8. So we'll do,
The gentleman here is one of them.
okay, we'll do about 4 minutes each. Is that okay? So why don't you get in line onto the left of this gentleman here, or you start first, red shirt. You go first.
Where do I speak?
Right here. Come right up here. Right here. Come up to the table. You paid for it.
I just want to say a few things.
Okay, we'll get you.
My name is Franklin Cho. I'm a member of the Libertarian Party of Hawaii. I'm not a representative of the Libertarian Party of Hawaii. I also work for one of your friends, Mr. Dana Miller at SMS Research. He wants to say hi.
Good scientist.
But anyway, I agree with everything and all the analysis of all the speakers. I just want to say that this is happening in the West and in Hawaii, not by accident or chance. It's happening because there's a libertarian heritage that is unique to the West. Same-sex marriage is not going to happen in Tonga. It's not going to happen in Islamic cultures or Confucian cultures. It's not even going to happen in the borderline Western cultures like Russia, because they place the primacy of the group over the individual. And in the West, we have a long libertarian heritage going back to classical times, to the Enlightenment, and has evolved to the point where we place the individual above the group, at the expense of the group in many ways. And this is a natural evolution from the sexual liberations of the 60s on, and it has to do with the divorce rate and everything else. So how can you counter this trend, and who's going to be on the winning side and the losing side, who is on the advance and who is on the retreat? From my perspective, I see that it's a really last stand, and the issues brought up about polygamy, it's conceptually, theoretically, yes, why not more than 2 people? Why just stick with couples? But it's not going to happen. There shouldn't be any worry about that, because there's both militant feminism and the religious groups that will block polygamy. It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. So you shouldn't worry about that. But
if I, just real quick, I'll ask you a question. No? Okay. Purple shirt, you've been sitting for a long time. You want to get up there and talk. I can see your face. Come on up.
Very much like to. You've heard from all the experts. You've got all the trees laid out, and nobody has spoken to the forest.
Okay.
I'm sorry your friend has left, and I apologize. I'm going to have to spit it out fast because I don't have time to expectorate.
Well, you got 4 minutes. That's double what they're going to give you in the Senate.
Could you state your name? State your name, please.
Okay. This is rehearsal for the Senate because it's short.
Okay.
But I wish your friend had stayed. The answer to why marriage is important is the same as why is water is wet. It doesn't matter why we believe it's wet. That's the way the universe is created. That's why we're here and the Neanderthals are not. Humans reproduce too slowly to live in alpha male herds. Marriage forms a complete bond, ties them, and then it's enforced. So the beta males get a place in society. Okay, they get to form villages, which you can't form in an alpha male. Villages are big enough to have governments, etc. I'm an actuary, 35 years. There's nobody, it's going to challenge my credentials or even come close.
Your name, sir?
George Barish.
George!
Yes, I've written before.
Many letters to the editor, this man writes.
Until I got tired and didn't get paid. Okay, here's my testimony, basically. And by the way, England children have found that sex without responsibility is more fun than sex with responsibility. They no longer produce enough children to replace themselves. Neither do the French. That's your answer.
No, the Russians.
Yeah, probably. Most of the European countries are gone.
Yeah.
And if you want me, I'll go drag some charts up. Here's my thing. It's basically, you're asking whether you should change the definition of marriage. I believe that's the wrong question. The correct question is, do you have a right to change the definition of the word marriage? And when I say, not even Webster does that. Okay, they follow the people. They record what people mean by the word. And just for clarity, marriage has traditionally been a permanent bond between a man and a woman, a bond that is intended to conceive and raise children for society, and it's a bond that is protected and enforced by society. That's what made us, that's why we're here and Neanderthals aren't. They never got the message. Here's my reason why you don't have a right to modify the definition. 3, real quick. One is, the true religions and the great philosophies defined marriage the way I have long before humans invented government. Secular government borrowed the term to write secular laws, and that's all we're talking about right now. How do we change the definition of a secular law word. So nobody has a right to change the stuff they borrow. You just don't. I mean, you can't, how do you argue that? Okay, the second one is, I am here for the American political party. I speak as a member of the American people. We are the only people on earth, first and only, to define ourselves in terms of a common set of principles and beliefs instead of a common bloodline. Example, if you tried to tie all the people behind me together by bloodline, you'd have to go back to Adam and Eve. And had my four immigrant grandparents fled tyranny to like China, Africa, France, Mexico, I could not stand here and say, we Chinese, we Africans, without being laughed at or hurt. But any one of us can stand here and say, we Americans, okay? So my basic point is, if we're defined by a set of principles, if we don't have them, we don't exist. And I'm saying no one can refute the argument that the education the founders received was based on the Judeo-Christian principles and belief system developed by Western civilization over thousands of years. They relied on it when they declared my right to exist separate from the English people. They said the Creator said it's okay. And if you read the Declaration, it takes them 200 words to say all that stuff, and then 4.5 pages because they believed it was necessary to explain to the rest of the world why they had a right to do it. And marriage, the way this is defined, is at the core of the Judeo-Christian belief system. Okay, that's one reason.
You gotta summarize, George.
Okay, the other quick reason is the reason that we are sitting here, yes, as representatives of faith, begging at your feet, begging you not to change a definition of a word we have held sacred since before government existed, is because of those belief systems. If our government had been formed on any other basis right now, most notably the Islamic faith system, you would be sitting on this side at our feet, and we'd be telling you what to do, because under those systems, there is no separation of church and state. And one last thing. This separation of church and state, the first root in the Western civilization comes with these words from Jesus Christ. And it doesn't matter whether he's a man. He was a man. You can argue whether his father was God or another man. Doesn't matter. He said, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God's. That's what creates the separation of church and state. And that's the only reason you're up there. Yeah. If you were in an Islamic nation, your only function would be as the enforcement arm of the church.
Thank you, George. Appreciate it.
All right, you're welcome.
I'd like to introduce a late arrival. She was out educating other folks in the community on what the bill does. Representative Beth Fukumoto, a bright, shining star. She is a bright, shining star, and we expect big things from her in the future. So thank you, Beth. Anyone else want to share their comments? Okay, Margaret. Is it Margaret? Mary? Sue, come on up. Margaret, Mary. Sue, I wasn't even close. Okay, 4 minutes.
Actually, I had questions for Dr. Regnerus, our sociologist, and our marriage attorney, Mr. Duncan, but they've both gone.
Well, Regnerus is still there.
Oh, here he is.
Come on up.
Good.
He thought he was off the hook.
You know, this is a tangled up. This tree is has a whole lot of tangled up branches.
4 minutes, Sue.
Okay, and one of the twisted branches that we have not heard about tonight is a provision in this bill that allows teenagers to marry without parental consent. This is more than an attack on marriage, it's an attack on parental rights. And I'm wondering, as a sociologist, if there has been any research done on youth marriages, to your knowledge, that we can use in our testimonies, because this is egregious in my not so humble opinion. And I'm wondering if any other states allow teenagers to marry without parental consent, and I know that's more of a legal question.
I won't answer the legal aspects of that because I don't know them, and I don't know how this works into this particular bill. I do know a little bit of the literature, I'll be brief, on teen marriage, and basically, if we're predicting success being still married, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, it's wisest to wait until one is outside of the teenage years after age 19. The biggest drop-off in divorce rates happens if you wait past the teen years, right? And then there's typically, the sweet spot for long-term success as defined by not getting divorced is in the mid to upper 20s. But, there's success stories of people who get married in their teenagers, there's success stories of people who get married in their 30s, and we can also define success differently. Like, you have a happy marriage. But I don't know a whole lot about the provision that you're speaking of around teenage marriage. I just know that, the benefits typically accrue after you wait till after 19. Now, it is... that's especially true of men. Men, you see it more after age 21, actually,
Well,
than women.
but to your knowledge, there's no research that shows the failure rates of teen marriages or
there
any
are.
such
There
thing.
are
Okay.
studies about failure rates.
Okay.
Yeah,
He,
sure.
he just said, confirmed what you asserted, that it's
Do
worse.
you know why that provision to change the marriage for minors?
I'm only guessing because the age of consent is 16. I'm guessing, I'm
But-
speculating, yeah. Beth, do you have any questions?
With parental consent
Yeah.
at 16. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Anyone else? Todd, come on up. My good friend Todd Hargrove from Waikiki. Come on up, Todd. Thank you for sitting through this all night.
Well, first off, this was very enlightening, and I learned a lot, but the thing that bothers me was that in the bill, when Mr. Hochberg mentioned that the Attorney General's office forgot to look at that section that involves the 98 amendment.
Yeah.
So anyway, I was wondering if any of you three can ask Mr. Hochberg to bring it up at the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing.
Oh, he's all over, Todd. Don't worry about that. He's going to do that.
All right, and I appreciate and I appreciate you guys having this informational briefing. It was very educational, very powerful, and I too say let the people decide.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you. Miss Gideon, come on up. I know this lady. This is a conflict of interest. I was her landlord once in absentia.
Oh my goodness, what a memory. Perfect memory.
Your name first, please.
My name is Sylvia Gideon, and I am approaching this in begging you. I think this should go before the people because there are a lot of aspects that will affect a lot of us. As far as religion, I am Mormon. My husband is Catholic. But to me, I see this is pushing the envelope a little closer to maybe religions losing their tax-exempt status. Now, this is down the way, but the envelope is being pushed in that way. I was just speaking to an attorney out in the hallway. She was in here, And she said that in California, you've probably read about it, the Boy Scouts are maybe going to lose their tax-exempt status because of the
Right.
whatever.
Well, it's interesting in Scout Creed, I was a Life Scout, not Eagle. But one of the things they have to do is say morally straight. That's actually in their creed. Trustworthy, honest, clean, reverent, morally straight. That's in their creed.
And good you brought that up. So if that is redefined,
Yeah,
so where does that leave
yeah.
the Scouts, the churches,
Sylvia,
and the tax-exempt status?
let me ask you, did you find, I learned stuff tonight. Did you find it informative?
Oh, I found it very, very informative.
I learned stuff I didn't even know existed.
Mhm.
I mean, it was breathtaking.
Absolutely.
So, thank you for sitting through it all.
To me, it's downright frightening. I have 4 boys. Thank God they're all Eagle Scouts. Bodie Owali's name was brought up tonight. He was my son's scout leader. He was
Good man.
fabulous. But, you know, he cannot, I don't think judges can speak out on their...
No, they can't.
But I'll tell you, to me, it goes back to that tax-exempt status. Is it possible if our bishops or priests or ministers, if they refuse to do the marriages in their churches, can the churches lose the tax-exempt status down the road?
Down
I mean,
the
that
road,
would
yeah.
that looks like it would be kind
Sure.
of
Oh, that's a small
coming
thing.
up
Yeah.
if this is passed.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. We have anybody else who'd like to make
Thank
some
you.
comments? Yes, ma'am. Come on up. She's a fireball.
Okay. I was going to try
I
to
met her.
rewrite my notes so I could read them better.
Okay, darling, we got 4 minutes for
Okay,
you.
less than 4 minutes.
No, 4 minutes full. We're not going to cheat you.
Okay. Okay.
Beth, we're giving them double what the Senate gives. We give them.
I've been down here for the last 4 weeks every single day, but I just want to summarize what I think are the most important things. Homosexual acts are not safe for homosexuals. homosexinfo.org/sexuality. I got blocked from the internet at the library from that. It's very non-biased, detailed information on what the behaviors are in that community. They are unsafe for homosexuals. HIV/AIDS CDC surveillance report that the governor signed off on, over 2,000 people have died of AIDS here in Hawaii, not to mention the ones that moved off the island. The rectum is not made for sex. Punctured rectum can bring peritonitis and a painful death. And I did go down to the hospitals and I spoke to some of these people in these departments. Big objects and fisting can bring someone to live in a colostomy bag for life. I have a gay hairdresser, a manicurist, even though I bite my nails, and a very intelligent friend, and they are all gay, and I love them dearly. People Can Change is a very successful counseling group at the Landover Baptist Church. I recently found this website, and I came to find that there's an ex-gay parade. Ex-gay parade, at the end of the parade, they get handed a book, Alfie's Home, ALFIE''S, Home. And there's a 1-minute YouTube on the internet about this. This is an ex-gay therapist's true to life story. It's a children's book, and that's all I have to say. It's very wonderful, and he changed. He's married, he has children, and he is a counselor now, helping people that were homosexuals.
Thank you so much.
That's it.
Anyone else before we wrap it up? We got a young lady over there. Come on up.
Hi, I'm Enora Ng, and I heard some rumors, I guess, amongst your colleagues and stuff that, especially the young ones, that they say they represent our generation and that they support same-sex marriage and that we're all for it because we love everybody and it's Hawaii and we believe in aloha. If you guys could let them know that we don't. Actually, we created a Facebook page There's about 1,500 members in our group right now. We just created a few weeks ago, and like it's been growing. And we've been really trying to like educate people about the bill, about the process. We've been showing them how to contact their legislators, and we've been teaching them how to write testimonies. And that we're gonna be there on the 28th. And if you could just let them know and tell them that if they care enough to make a Facebook page, I have admin powers, so I can add them rather quickly.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. You have a question?
I do, yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that touches on something that concerns me because I like to consider myself young. And most of our caucus, 4 members of our caucus are under 35, and we're all voting no. So that is sort of a narrative that is untrue. And thank you for being here. And I really would get as many people out that are your age on the 28th for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Got a gentleman in the back. Come on up.
Another young man.
It's my first time doing this.
Good for
my
you.
ears might be getting red and my all warmed up.
Good for you.
But first of all, I'd like to thank for the information. And,
Your name, sir?
Sheldon Jardine.
Sheldon Jardine.
I know I got 4 minutes. I'd like to spend 1 minute just thanking you, being very grateful. And also, the way you guys speak is so very beautiful. Very, very informal, especially with the speakers here. Really took that in, took that to heart. And I speak for myself and nobody else except my wife and my 2 young children. And I'm here because if this bill is passed, then obviously the 2 wonderful children that I have are obviously not standing alone in the future. But I believe, I got Christians too, if you don't mind. I believe this will create chaos. It's obvious. We have that common sense to really see if a child is thrown in the river, accidentally we'll jump in and get him. I got this question today about that. If my child, I was talking outside, and if my child was thrown into the river, would you jump in? I was like, well, if there was accidentally bumped in, you would jump in and get him, right? If you knew that child was in the river, would you wait and see the results at the end? And then they asked me, well, what if it was your child? I said, well, if it was your child and you had no way of getting to your child, would you want me to jump in that river and get your child? And they said, yeah, when that time come. And I'm saying, that's the whole reason why I'm going up to that Capitol right now. That's today. I've already jumped in.
Thank you.
So I say, let the people dive. Let us swim. We've been walking on the surface of the water, and I come here and I take this cap off. First of all, in respects of, I'm a man of faith, my Most High God. I take this off because I have the privilege to come before you guys and show my gratitude and love and kindness that we do have the privilege to speak out. And you guys give us that advantage. But you can understand, if you guys stand with us with that advantage that you guys give us, we're gonna come hard. But we come in love. Like how the gentleman was saying about earlier, I couldn't recall what his name was, but there was Catholics that told the 2 couples, the 2 lesbians, we can't give you communion. Well, in our Christian community, we welcome them as individually. They're not married. We welcome them as individuals. They're welcome to go ahead and have communion. Our Lord says, come as you are. Now, we're here speaking love, but we ask for the same be back towards us. Because if not, it's obviously chaos.
Sheldon, question. This is your warm-up. Are you ready to come back on Monday at 10:30 to testify at the Senate, or next Thursday to testify in the House?
I wasn't even prepared to. I looked at the schedule and I was like...
You're speaking from your heart, and that's what really
I am.
makes
I'm
a
being
difference.
formal. I'm not grateful for you guys to be up here.
Yeah.
But again, the heart that I have is because I've seen hearts growing in front of me,
Yeah.
like step by step. And I gotta wake up in the morning and spend that time away just to make sure that I have more time in the long run to spend with time with them. If this bill doesn't pass, we won't be fighting for something that we didn't have to fight for. You know what I mean?
Yep.
The questions I have
Okay.
is honestly, if this thing is passed, what do you believe the results will be? Where do you guys see it? I mean, you guys are the experts in seeing the future of you guys.
That's what all of these experts were brought in. They gave a picture of Canada, they gave a picture of Vermont, they gave a picture of Hawaii, they gave a picture of what the largest study that was ever done indicates. It was a reality check. It was a wake up to say that, this is more about what the whole of society is going to have, not just for one segment, but for the entire segment. It's a macro change of which we've only seen some of the light, and it's still too fresh and new to know exactly what's going to happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so my response to that then is, okay, then that's confirmation. We don't want a chaos, because chaos will bring martial law. We don't
Yeah.
want it.
And just for clarification, none of us here support it.
Yeah, right.
Marriage. Okay.
Right, cool.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Sheldon.
All right, one last, you got two more people. Come on up, sir. Give you 4 minutes as a bonus.
Thank you. My name is James Melton. My wife Bonnie and I been married for 57 years.
Oh, my goodness.
We spent 20 in the Air Force. I retired as a colonel. We spent 27 years in China doing mission work. So we were shocked when we came back to this country and found out the changes that took place in those 27 years. It is unbelievable. It's shocking to know that our country has gone down that far so quickly. And Hawaii is right there downward with trend. Two things. We say we are government of the people, by the people, and for the people, right? So where is that in Hawaii? I feel like the government is cramming down this to our throats. If it's of the people, by the people, and for the people, what is it for all of the people in Hawaii? How does this help all the people in Hawaii, not just a few? How does it affect and help everyone? That's number one. Number two is that our motto in Hawaii is, our motto in Hawaii is, the life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. Now, if you go look up that word righteousness, if they haven't changed it by government command, that comes from God only. Only God is righteous. No. We have that motto. I Googled this. What does this mean? I put it in and Googled it. What does this mean? And I was shocked because initially it had in Jesus Christ. The life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness in Jesus Christ. That was removed. Why and when, it didn't say. But this is what it said. Okay, our whole life of our land depends upon the righteousness. If we do away with righteousness, what is right, in God's eyes, we're finished.
James, one question. James, one question.
Yes.
You and your wife been married 57 years?
Yes.
Do you think you're going to make it?
It's getting more difficult.
Okay. All right, our last testifier, come on up.
I can do this in 30 seconds. I wanted to give you, Representative McDermott, the big picture of, we're wondering why they're attacking our Christian faith so much. Have you all seen that movie, which First Assembly is really going for this movement, and it's called Agenda 21. It's about the Communist Party planned on this on us 50, 100 years ago, many years ago, to take America down by two things, or several things. They're going to do it through the Democratic Party, so you see all the liberal left communists in it, and they're going to take down family and faith. And they need to take down the Christians because we have the strong faith. You notice they're not attacking the Muslims nor the Taoists, my Buddhist friends or anything. So that movie is called Agenda 21. And if you would pick a copy of that up, you'd get the bigger picture because it doesn't make sense to us why they're attacking our faith. And they have it's a DVD at First Assembly for $10. But you have to get it. So
what is your name, madam?
Miss Anonymity.
Anonymity.
Thank you.
You know what?
When you show that film, please invite all your Democratic friends over. I'm going to buy some. Do you think it would help to buy some for some of our Democratic reps?
Buy me and I'll reimburse you.
Okay, I'll find you.
One last, you want to say something, sir? You're the last guy, and then I'll give Beth a closing statement, Gene a closing statement. We'll be out by 9.
My name's Wes Yamada. I agree with the other gentleman about the voice of the people is not being represented or being given a chance. And this whole process of calling a special session, the governor did not consult with the legislature in choosing the dates of this special session. Did he consult with you folks?
No.
That's what I'm hearing from other representatives. Senate President Donna Kim did not agree to a special session. Speaker Joseph Suki, is that the House Speaker, did not agree to a special session. The governor cannot tell the legislature what to do or how to write laws. To me, this seems so one-sided to rush it through to a special session that's going to impact every family. It's too big of an issue that they didn't even want to handle civil unions, and this is much greater than civil unions.
You're correct.
And my
Wes.
question is, if the Senate President, the House Speaker did not agree, why do they go along with the governor?
He can call it. They don't have to do anything. They can just show up and go home. So call Joe Suki and tell him to show up and go home. Okay? Because we've tried.
Because Hawaii has one of the lowest voter turnout in the nation. If this passes, it's going to be the lowest turnout.
Yeah.
Because we no longer have representation.
Thank you, Wes.
And
Okay,
appreciate
we're gonna give Representative Fukumoto 1 to 2 minutes, and then Representative Ward, and then we'll adjourn this.
Okay, I don't think I ever speak for 2 minutes, so it'll be fast. I just want to say, I think we don't take enough time to listen to people in this building, so I wanted to thank Representatives McDermott and Ward for setting this up, just so that there's a chance for people to talk about this. And I hope also that we'll see all of you back. I am on finance, so I will be sitting in the House hearing. So I hope you'll all be back on Monday and then also on Thursday to testify. Thank you.
That was only 1 minute.
Yeah, fast.
Oh, my God.
In the beginning, there was Tom Brower, and now in the end, there's Tom Brower. Welcome back, Representative Brower.
I wanted to leave for all the freaky stuff, so I had to take off.
I think all of you have got enough information for the evening. In fact, it's probably comparable to drinking out of a fire hose. It's just so much information. It's hard to digest because it's all still hypothetical, and unintended consequences always come out of some legislation that is half-baked and rushed. Do any of you remember the PLDC? We pushed it through, and then people say, oh, is that what it's about? We don't want that. What about the super ferry? We had the super ferry, and we did a quick job on it, and it was unconstitutional. I think as we rush through this, even though it's 8 days, we've heard tonight this is centuries old of what institutions that we have. And some of you who hold very strong felt beliefs have, in effect, shown that these are things that, in your conscience, I already feel the hurt that you're feeling by this. And it's not against the people who may practice something, but is, in effect, that which you yourself practice. So I think this has been a good warm-up for what otherwise are the formal hearings that are going to start in a few days. Encourage all of you to show up on Monday, go to the Senate at 10:30, and then on Thursday, come back to the House, because I think there's a lot of things that we don't know about what we're doing, and we need to hear from you. So thank you for coming tonight.
Representative Brower has passed on his closing statement, so I just want to thank you.
Well,
no, I asked you. Go ahead.
If you're going to call me out,
that'll provoke him to speak.
No. A handful of people who are here tonight came to my office, many constituents, and I appreciate that. Sometimes I think a good legislator isn't on either side of the issue, but listens to both sides. And when we had the debate on civil unions, I attended both, those who were in favor and those who were not in favor. And I would like to continue what I will call that tradition, because I think a lot of things were important and said tonight, and I will keep an open mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you all for coming and listening tonight. I'm sure you learned a lot. I certainly did. Thank you so very much for you guys who traveled so halfway around the world. Thank you so very much. Thank you to all who listened. After, I'll stick around for you, okay? But until next time, aloha and God bless you all.
Thank you for doing this. Will any of the representatives... Sorry, I was late.